All right. Now that we're all logged in, I started yesterday with the polling because that is the manual way that you communicate with your clocks. But I also told you at that time you could automate that particular process. But I always thought it was great that your clients should always know how to manually poll the clocks if they should ever need to. Well, the auto process that we're going to look at is actually what we refer to as a service. So it is something that we have to install, create. We have to go through the actual steps. And the auto process is about 4 steps. Now, the best way to start this process, and we're actually going to walk through that, because remember, when I'm working with a client, I don't necessarily know where TA100 Pro was installed or anything like that. Now, of course, on my computer, I definitely know where it's installed. But again, working with a client, I have no idea. So what I typically have them to do is just minimize TA100 Pro on their desktop where they can see the icon of TA100 Pro. Just do a right-click on that, come down to Properties. And from here, we're going right into whatever that directory is that TA100 Pro is housed in from the shortcut tab. So I'll simply click Find Target, and that will bring me into the root folder of TA100 Pro. From this folder, this is where we're going to do our first step. And remember, the very first item that we need to do is actually to install the auto process. So it is going to be in alpha order, so you'll notice it's right here, and it simply says install autoprocess.exe. I am going to double-click this item. When I double-click this item, it is a possibility you guys may miss what's going to happen because of the slight delay with GoToMeeting, because it happens so fast. But hopefully you may see it. But what's going to happen is you're going to see a black box that appears kind of like an old DOS prompt window, but it's going to pop up real fast and simply go away. And that is how I know that I had success in step 1. So here I'll go ahead and double-click Install Auto Process. And again, hopefully you guys were able to see it. Again, it was a very, very fast. So that is indeed step 1. Step 2, I now need to create what is called an auto process service. Now let me show you where that auto process service will go. If I go back into TA100 Pro, if we go to Communication Auto Process, I need something to already be residing in this area. It's something that's called an auto process service. So that is what I'm looking to create in step number 2. So here I'll just minimize TA100 Pro again, back in the root folder. Still in alpha order, I'm looking for autoprocess.exe. Again, you'll notice there are 2 using the same graphic, but one is auto process service setup, which is what we'll use in the final step to actually start the process. But for right now, I just need to create the auto process service. So that is the first one. Sometimes you can say, well, the first one is the one with the uppercase P, and that is exactly correct. Now, when I double-click this item, what you can expect to see is a white screen that will pop up, and in the top right corner, it should say Nothing to Process. And that is how I know I have successfully completed step 2. So here, we'll go ahead and double-click here. And there it is. And that automatically goes away. So that was step 2. Remember, the purpose of step 2 was to create the auto process service. So to the bottom, I'll go back to TA100 Pro. And now when I go to Communications and Auto Process, there is my auto process service. So step 2 created this environment. Because anything that I'm going to set up to be automated in the software, I'm going to attach it all to this service of auto process. So to the right side here, we'll do Edit. And then in Auto Process Service, remember, everything that I want to have automated is going to be added into this service. So to the right side, I'll click Add here. And the first item that we're going to do is, of course, the polling. Now remember, polling is not the only item that you can auto-process. There are certainly other features, such as reports, the re-index, the backup. All of those items are things that could potentially be automated in the software. Today in training, I'm just going to show you, of course, the polling. So I'm going to label this description as polling. The item here is poll clocks because that is the process that we want to automate at this time. The poll options, these items should look familiar. Remember, these are the same options that we saw yesterday in the manual side of things. So I'm going to poll, clear, set clock date and times, we'll program, we'll load the messages, and we'll process, and we'll even do a retrieve. Again, based on the type of clocks, or I won't say based on the type of clocks, but yeah, definitely based on the type of clocks, the load messages certainly may not be necessary. If you're working with a client and they have the hand punch units, again, load messages are not necessary unless they're using the HP 4000 clock. Well, of course, that clock does display messages. The bell schedules, if they do have the relay module for bell schedules to ring, then certainly you would want to check that box as well. At the bottom, I'll click OK here. I'll go ahead and tag the clock. And then to the right side, I need to determine, because one, I know that I'm going to replicate this time. The question is, let's say I want to do it every 2 hours. Well, do I want to do it every 2 hours on the hour? Or do I want it to be 10 minutes after the hour, or 30 minutes after the hour, or even 15 minutes after the hour? Well, here I'm actually going to say 15 minutes after the hour. And I only want to poll on Monday through Friday. At the bottom, I'll click OK here. And then in the bottom right corner, here is my replicate feature. This will allow me to tell the system if I want to do this every 30 minutes, every hour, every 2 hours, every 4 hours. So here I'll just click replicate. I can click the drop down here and notice you can start with every minute if you wanted to, every 2 minutes. But I would caution you, depending on the communication that the clock is using, certainly every minute may not be appropriate. For example, if I was working with a client and they were using a modem, I would never recommend to hold the clock every minute. Probably not a good item. Here I'm going to actually go every 2 hours. Click OK here. And notice it automatically takes place starting from midnight. Remember my very first time when I created the entry, which was at 12:15 a.m., and it takes it every 2 hours after that. And again, it's 15 minutes after because that was the original time that I started. At the bottom, I can click OK here, and I can close here. That was step 3 of the process, literally deciding what you wanted to have auto-process. For step 4, we're actually going back into the folder of TA100 Pro. And remember, I told you, now that we have everything in place, the only thing that we want to do now is actually start the service. So here in the Auto Process Service Setup.exe, I'll go ahead and double-click that. And in this window, it opens up a start window, and of course there is a stop, but you'll notice the stop is unavailable because it has not been started. So all we want to do is go ahead and start this, and hopefully I don't have anything else running in my system. And it looks like I may have something else running because by now it should have activated the stop. So let me go back and have a look at my Gen Pro, because remember I keep everything on one system here. See, hopefully that killed it. There we go. All right, so again, once I double-click my start icon, notice it is now ready to be stopped. So that means the process itself is definitely started. So whenever it is supposed to pull those clocks, it will indeed proceed to do so. Notice, though, that last box, and I did mention this, when you do start the process, you definitely want to make sure that automatically start service when operating system starts. The reason for that is wherever TA100 Pro has been installed and you create the auto process service from that particular computer, if there comes a time when that computer should be rebooted or it needs to be powered down to have work done or something on it, well, we want to make sure whenever that computer is restarted that our auto process is also restarted. Excuse me, as well. Here I am going to go ahead and stop this because I need to do some other things a little bit later in TA100 Pro. Any questions about the auto process?
Can this be set up on the server?
I'm listening. I heard something about the server.
Yes. Can this service be set up on a server situation?
You can. Now, the only drawback with that, remember when you are doing it as a service item, in other words, just to back up or, well, wait, let me make sure, because I don't want to get the backup confused with what you're saying. What we are doing is running it as a service on the server. That is exactly what we're doing here.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, then we're going to go ahead and close out of this. And back into TA100 Pro. We are now officially getting ready to start Session 2. In Session 2, remember, we're kind of switching gears just a little bit because we're looking at it now more from a management perspective. A management perspective being how do we add new employees into the system? How do we make all the necessary edits and corrections to those employees? How do we take care of the time card? All of those items. So in order to do that, we're actually going to go to daily operations. From daily operations, we're headed down to the employee section. In the employee section, I always like to say this area is divided into two sides, a left side and, of course, the right side. The left side is exactly where you'll see all of the employee information. It starts in the top left corner where you can actually see whichever employee that you are connected to. You can see their employee number, you can see their name, and right now, because I have this box in the bottom left corner checked that says Show Inactive, it's actually going to tell me if the employee is inactive or active. If I uncheck that box, meaning I'm only viewing active employees, then notice that label goes away. The arrow that you see here, this is your filter selection. In other words, if I have created different divisions or different groups, or if I want to be able to separate out my salary versus hourly or full-time, part-time, permanent, and temporary, I can check these features, click OK, and it allows me to filter my employees based on those labels. Now keep in mind, currently I haven't assigned employees to these separate divisions. Right now I believe everyone is assigned to the Time America division. And remember, we just created the New York division on yesterday. For the group, and you may recall we did create the training group on yesterday, but these groups were already in place. Now, I do believe some employees are assigned to specific groups. So let's say here if I said Time America admin, notice it only gives me 2 employees because the focus is on a specific group. If I said production, that actually gives me the other 3 employees. So again, those are indeed separate groups. Switch it back to all, I get all of my employees back. The salary labels, the full-time labels, the permanent, all of those items, well, with the exception of salary versus hourly, that's going to be on the wages tab where you can make that decision. Again, that's where you're labeling employees hourly versus salary. But the other of those labels, the full-time label versus part-time or the permanent versus temporary, those labels are going to be defined on the status tab. So once you make those assignments, you're definitely able to use these particular features here. For training today, I'm just going to back out the last 3 and just keep the top 2. The buttons here actually define or allow you to manipulate your employee list. If you notice, prior is unavailable because I'm already at the top of the list. But if I click next, it'll actually take me to the next employee, which is Peter Baines. You'll also find that the prior button is now open and available. The Find button. The Find button actually allows me to locate a specific employee. As long as I know what the employee number is, so the code is actually the employee number, or if I know the last name of that person, or if I know the badge number. Again, you don't need all three. You just need one of these items that you're looking for. So here in the last name, if I key in Smith, notice it automatically takes me to John Smith. So it's a great way, of course, if you're working with a client and they have quite a few employees, to quickly locate or find an employee. Find would be the best way. In the bottom left corner, number versus name. Right now, if I wanted to have this employee list in numerical order based on the employee number, I can simply switch it back over to number. If I prefer to see it in name order, alpha by last name, of course, I can keep it in name format. If you recall on yesterday, I think I mentioned to you then that I do not recommend that you delete employees out of the system. Deleting employees out of the system is also removing all of their time and attendance history. So what we do recommend that you do is simply make those employees inactive. The status tab is actually going to be the tab where you will define if someone is active or inactive. But once you make someone inactive, that means they're still in the system. So this box says if you ever want to see those employees that you have made inactive, all you have to do is check the box, and their names will become a part of the list as well. And of course, you'll know which ones are active or inactive. One, the label will appear here as inactive, and then two, they're actually going to have an asterisk by their name. Any questions about the left side of the screen? Then what we're going to do to introduce you to all of these other tabs, or the majority of the other tabs going across the top, we are going to add a new employee into the software. The new employee that we're going to add is just going to be a demo employee that will take us through the remaining of our training. In other words, this will be the employee that we make all of the edits and corrections to in the time card. This will be the employee that we run our reports from. At the bottom of the Detail tab, you'll notice there are several buttons. The Add button, because that is exactly what I want to do, add a new employee. But if I needed to change anything that was resting in this detail screen, so if maybe the first name of Frank is incorrect, maybe it really should have been Franklin. Again, I can click Edit, go in, actually update that to Franklin, click OK, and the edit is done. The Delete button, well, this is the feature that I did recommend you may want to stay away from. Remember, we don't recommend deleting employees. Now, if there is a special situation, of course, we know that there are always special situations. Maybe you interviewed an employee, you hired them on the spot, and that person was supposed to show up Monday to start work. Well, guess what? That person never showed up. They never showed up Monday, Tuesday, today is Wednesday. They never showed up. Well, at that point, if you did go ahead and add that employee into the system, that is a great example of someone that you can delete. Why? Well, they have no attachment to the software. And the great thing about deleting someone from the software, if I click Delete here, notice how it says, are you sure you want to delete? And I click OK. Notice it pops up again. There is a second confirmation, and it says, are you absolutely sure you want to delete this employee? Why? Because remember, we don't make the recommendation to delete. So if you are going to delete, we do give you that second confirmation to make absolutely sure. Of course, here I'll go ahead and cancel. The Print button, this is the Print button that you will see continuing through all of the tabs going forward. This Print button, think of it as a shortcut into the report section. Why? Because it will allow you to run reports from any one of those sections that you see listed. Now, the majority of these sections are, for the most part, the same tabs that you see going across the top. So all of those are available to you. And, of course, the Close button. Keep in mind the Close button does not just close you out of the detail screen. It closes you completely out of the Configure Employee section. So here, if I was to click close, notice I'm completely out of that section. So for future reference, if you want to just go from the Detail tab to the Time Card tab, just click the Time Card tab. If you want to go to the Status tab, again, all you have to do is click the tab. But clicking Close closes the entire Employee section. So back on the Detail tab to the bottom, we'll click Add. The employee number. Remember, employee numbers are primarily coming from your payroll software or your client's payroll vendor. So all of the new employees definitely need to be set up in payroll first because we need to know what that employee number is. Think of it this way. The employee number is that one single characteristic that makes that employee really be that employee when that information rolls into payroll. That's that one unique characteristic. In this example, the employee number, I'll just go ahead and make that number 6. If I tab out of it, notice it does 0 field. That is a lesson that we learned yesterday back from the main company, that we have to determine how many characters the employee number is, and we also have to decide, or we did decide, if it was numeric or if it was alphanumeric. We decided that it was definitely numeric. By making the decision that it's numeric, it is always going to 0 field. For training purposes, I'm not going to worry about a social or a birthday, and notice those 2 items are not mandatory. In fact, the only thing on this screen that is truly mandatory is, of course, the employee number. I know you're thinking, well, not the last name or the first name? No. But again, is it helpful to have the last name and the first name? Certainly when you begin to run reports or when you're looking to the left side of the screen here trying to select employees, definitely the last name and the first name do help. In this case, we'll go ahead and make the last name Sample and the first name Joe. Again, I'm not going to worry about an address, city, zip, state, phone, or email, but that does bring us to the hire date. Now, the hire date is also not a mandatory field, but I would say that pretty much depends on how you're using the software. If you recall in the policy on yesterday, we had a policy, I think we were looking at the standard pay policy, where it did indeed pay holiday pay. Well, we had some qualification rules that decided when the employee would actually receive the holiday pay. And one of the qualification rules was that the employee had to be with the company, I think it was 30 days or 45 days, 60 days, something like that. Well, how does the system know if the employee has been with the company for that time frame? It's going to base that information from the hire date. So I do recommend certainly make sure that your clients do use the hire date field, and they also make sure that the date is correct. Now, something else the hire date could also be used for, and that is your benefits. Remember the benefits that we looked at yesterday? We paid out personal, sick, and vacation. Vacation and personal were all based on a rollover of hire date or payout of hire date. So we definitely want to make sure that the hire date is correct for benefit purposes. But again, it's all about how the client is using the system. In this case, because we definitely have 2 items that are based on hire date, we want to make sure that the hire date is in the software. In this example, I'm just going to backdate it a little bit. We'll say that this employee actually hired on October 27th of this year. Accrue this month. Again, this is another benefit type feature that you can activate. If you want the accruals to truly start accruing as of this month, you can certainly do that. Again, I typically don't activate accrue this month because it is all based on the type of benefit that you have indeed created in the system. The fiscal field, just to the right of that, if you recall yesterday when we were working with the benefits, I did explain to you at that time you would always have an opportunity to choose a fiscal field for your employees. If, when we created the benefits, we decided that versus hire date or versus other dates such as January 1st, we indeed wanted to use this field, well, this is where we would answer what is that date for each of our employees. Remember, none of the benefits that we created yesterday were actually using this particular field. Therefore, if the field is not in use, I typically recommend to clients just keep it the same as the hire date, and that way it doesn't cause confusion. And the next item that you see here is what we call an alternate hire date for benefits. What if I have a client, or let's say an employee, who was working with a company for several years, and then they decided to depart, and maybe they were away for about 6 months, and then they decided to come back. Well, if they decided to return, maybe they created a scenario that said, well, if I come back, I need to make sure that my benefits pick up from, exactly where they were. I don't want to start all over as a new employee. Well, not a problem. Here I can check this box, and whatever their original hire date was, this is where I can actually include that information. So if the employee's original hire date was May 15th of 1994, again, they can make that happen here. So that means all of this employee's benefits are going to be based on this 1994 date, not on the 2010 date. Because remember, you have some benefits that increase over the years. So again, he's probably at the max level, which is why he doesn't want to go back to starting all over as a new employee. The 911 pound, again, this was our custom field that we decided to use as an emergency number. So here we'll go ahead and add something in place. Perfect. Remember, we did not label the other 5 fields, but the system does come with the 6 custom fields. They are view only. You cannot run reports. You cannot qualify. You cannot sort from those particular fields. The next area is the division section. In the division area, if I click the drop down, this is essentially where you're able to see the different divisions that we talked about on yesterday. Remember, Time America was the main company division, but then we also created these other divisions. In this example, let's go ahead and assign this employee to the Arizona division. For the group, you may remember I explained groups to you yesterday. They were all a part of security. So remember, I created the training group on yesterday because eventually today, when we do get to the security side of things today, we are going to create a manager who is going to be responsible for all of those employees that are connected to the training group. So if I assign Joe Sample to the training group, that means that the manager who's going to be responsible for training will definitely be able to see Joe Sample. The holiday group, you may remember on yesterday we did create 2 holiday groups. Again, the software does offer 4 holiday groups, but we only created 2. We had one that was the Monday through Friday, and then we had the second group, which was the 24/7. In other words, if a holiday fell on a Saturday, well, the Monday through Friday people needed that holiday to be reflected on a Friday. In this case, we will go ahead and assign Joe Sample to the Monday through Friday holiday group. And this is also what I was saying yesterday. Because you cannot label the group, someone needs to remember exactly what Group 1 or Group 2 actually was. So I know because I created the groups on yesterday. But again, when you're working with a client, you need to make sure if they are going to use groups, they remember that. Now, most of your clients will probably not use groups, so it means that their holidays would just remain at all holidays, meaning that whatever holidays we've built in the list, they apply to all employees. The accrual, if you remember yesterday, we did have one accrual rule that we looked at, and that was the full-time hourly employee. So we'll go ahead and activate that. The PC clock, I am going to activate that because I do want to show that to you. And then in the bottom right corner, the comments window, if you click the comments window, you'll find it's just a free type screen. Now, I do recommend before you begin to type or before your client begins to key anything in, they probably want to insert a note. The note gives you the date, the time, and the person who created the actual comment. And if that's too much, you can just do the insert date, which gives you just the date. To clipboard, literally any of the information that you have in the comments window, it will copy that information to the clipboard. Of course, we know once we have something copied to the clipboard, we we can literally paste it anywhere else. Also, if you want to print the information residing in the window, there is a print option here as well. For now, this is a new employee. I really don't have any comments to say about this employee. So we'll go ahead and close here. Reviewing the details screen, everything looks to be in order. So all I need to do now is simply click OK. And notice it brings me directly into the status area. Why? Well, that's the beauty of adding a new employee into the software. It automatically brings up the next screens that you need to address. Here is the status window. In the status window, you'll notice at the bottom there is an add, edit, delete, and close. Here, first time around, the only thing you want to do is edit. You don't want to add, you just want to edit. In other words, we want to make sure that all of the labels are correct for this particular employee. So at the bottom, I'll click Edit. In this window, the only thing that I am going to change is actually going to switch this employee to being a temporary employee. So they are full-time, but they're temporary. We'll leave them at the standard policy. Do notice the status area, the date area, they're not available to us. Why? Because we are in edit mode. You cannot change the date in edit mode. You cannot make someone active or inactive in edit mode because you cannot change the date. So that's why the first time around, you only want to use edit. And the good news is that's the only time that you'll ever use the edit features, just to clean up that initial information. If going forward, there should be some changes. In other words, maybe the employee changes a policy. Maybe they change from full-time to part-time. Maybe they'll change from temporary to permanent. Or maybe they'll even change from active to inactive. Any changes that you go back and do are always going to use the add feature. Why? Because I can control the date here. So if I know that as of, December 20th, this employee is actually going to become inactive, I'll simply click inactive here. Do notice I click the temporary button before I click inactive, because when I make someone inactive, I want them to leave with the same information as to what they really are. So right now, if Joe Sample is temporary, when he is listed as inactive, I want to make sure that I know that he's leaving as a temporary employee. I can click OK here, and notice that gives us a new row listed here. So the system is going to know, come December 20th, this employee is an inactive employee. It knows all of that because we've listed it here. And we did that by using the add feature. So even if this employee returns, again, I'm not going to add a new employee in. I'm simply going to go back and make this employee active again. So any change at all, the label changes, full-time, part-time, permanent, temporary, the policy changes, and most definitely our active to inactive, we definitely want to use the add button going forward. Here, the December 20th is not a true item, so I am indeed going to delete that. And we're back to where we started. At the bottom, we'll click Close here, and that brings us into the assignment start date. This assignment start date is all about the schedule. It's that graphic right there. It's all about the schedule. Right now, the system wants to know, what date should we start the schedule for this employee? Well, because Joe Sample is a new employee, I'm definitely going to go with the higher date. Again, this company has already been using TA100 Pro. This is just a new employee that we're adding into the system. But that's not going to be the scenario when you begin to work with a client and that client is first getting started. That client may have 100 employees that are coming on to that new software of TA100 Pro, and we don't want to go back to the higher date for all of those existing employees. In that case, I tell clients, you typically want to get what I call a trigger date. In other words, what date are they thinking about starting the parallel testing? Or if they're not doing any parallels, what date are they thinking about going live? Then that's the date that we want to start their schedules from. It's also the date that if they're using wages, we want to start the wage information from. But those are the trigger dates. Because they could have employees that have been with the company for 5, 10 years. I don't want to go back and build a schedule for those employees based on their hire date. They were not using TA100 Pro then. So that's just a waste of memory space from TA100 Pro. We want to pick a date that we want to start as of, and that's when we'll start assigning the schedules. That's when we'll start assigning the wage information for those employees. And typically that date is, of course, the start of a pay cycle. In this case, though, we are going to stick with the hire date because, again, goal here is this company is already up and running. We're just adding a new employee. At the bottom, we'll click Continue here, and it brings us into what is called one scheduling week that I refer to as the foundation week. Because the beauty of this week is if I assign this employee properly, meaning assign him to the right shift on the right days, assign him to the correct department, assign him to the correct job, and then check off the actual work day, so the official work day. So if he works Monday through Friday, check off the work boxes for Monday through Friday. If I set this 1 week up properly, this week will continue to roll forward forever and ever and ever. Visually, I'll be able to see it always for 90 days out. But the good thing is the 90 days is a rolling 90-day window. So as 1 week rolls out, a new week rolls in. So again, if I set this up right and the employee doesn't change his or her schedule, I'll never have to come back into the scheduling window again. As always, though, we do start from Sunday. Sunday is simply the first day of any typical calendar that you're working with. And I point that out because this doesn't change based on the pay cycle of someone, of a particular company. If the company that you're working with, if their pay cycle is Tuesday through Monday, this scheduling window is still going to start on Sunday because it is a basic calendar view. So we always start from Sunday, and what you'll find is people will say, well, the client doesn't work on Sunday. Well, we're not going to check the work box on Sunday, but we are going to make sure that there is a shift in place on Sunday. Because if by chance, if that employee happens to come to work on Sunday, then they do have a shift to abide by that's going to take care of what are those three magical things. It's going to take care of the rounding. It's going to take care of any auto deductions that we have for lunch or break, and it's going to take care of the differential. So even though they're not officially scheduled to work that day, if they should show up, the system still knows how to react. The shift in this case, we're going to use the shift that we created yesterday, and we created training shifts. So let's go ahead and make that the 7 to 4. The department, we'll go ahead and make that training. And the job, well, we'll make that TA100 Pro. I have the shift information, I have the department information, I have the job information. What I want to do now is take all of the characteristics from Sunday and roll them all the way across to Saturday. I can do that by using the double arrows to the right of Sunday, and that automatically rolls me forward. So notice everything that I created for Sunday now is taken care of all the way across to Saturday. The only item I have to go back in and complete is to define the work days. Notice I didn't check the work box on Sunday because I knew the employee doesn't necessarily work on Sunday. That's not a scheduled work day. The scheduled work day, Monday through Friday. Now granted, I could have checked the work box for Sunday, then did my roll forward or update forward. It just means I would have unchecked Sunday and then unchecked Saturday before I moved or clicked OK. Also, in the area right here, you see the start and stop time. It's just it's all zeros, midnight to midnight. That is what we call a shift override. Typically, when I am creating a foundation, I never recommend creating a shift override. The reason for that, if I want to assign this employee to a shift that doesn't exist in this particular shifted window, this is where I would make that happen. I can create the shift on the fly. But again, I don't recommend doing that from the foundation because typically when we do the foundation, we need to make sure that the shifts are indeed in place. In other words, we created the software with the expectation that that was indeed a shift that we were going to use. Well, that means if one of the days, maybe one day Joe Sample is in school now, so he's not going to work 7 to 4. He's actually decided to work 5 to 2. Again, I can go in and create that, but I would want to do that directly in his schedule window, not in this original foundation that I'm creating for him. And I'll share that with you in just a moment. At the bottom, we'll click OK here. And then we have the messages area. Remember, the messages area is all about the employee receiving a message at the clock. So when that employee walks up to the clock, swipes the badge, should they receive a message at that time? If so, this is where the message is created. Now remember what I told you on yesterday. Hand punch units, the HP 50, 1000, 2000, 3000, they do not display messages. So the only hand punch unit that will display a personal message is indeed the HP 4000. Here I'll click All Clocks. I like the message to typically be the employee's name because it serves as a confirmation, especially for clients who have employees just pin punching in. It's a great confirmation. Employee just walks up to the clock, pin punches in a code, clicks enter, and guess what? They can see their name appear. So they definitely know that they used the right code because so many mistakes are possible when people are just pin punching or keying in information. But also, if I wanted to change that information, let's say I wanted to take this clock and I wanted to say, or in fact, I could just say happy birthday. That is an option. So again, if I want to do all clocks, I could make that so on all of the clocks. And now it's representation of all of the clocks. Now remember, messaging is a two-step process. Yesterday, you actually saw step 2, or even today when we created the automated process, you actually saw step 2. This is step 1, creating the message. Well, now that we've created the message, remember, that message is a part of TA100 Pro. The clock literally has no idea we've created a new message for that clock, not until we communicate with that clock and load the messages. So remember in the polling, there was a box that says load messages. Well, these are the messages that it is referring to. Here we are loading those messages into the clock. So if you have someone who is always creating messages but they don't have access to communicate with the clock, and the clock isn't set up to automatically load the message, again, those employees will never see those messages. So you have to create the message, and then, of course, you need to load the message via the polling or communication. In this case, I'm just going to set all of this back to be the employee's name. Perfect. At the bottom, I'll click Close here. And now we're headed over to the wage assignment. In the wage assignments window, this is where we can assign Joe Sample to a wage. It could be hourly. It could be salary. Keep in mind, I am going to make this employee an hourly employee. So I'm going to keep it at hourly. I'll check the box that says use a global wage. Global wage meaning that this employee, no matter where they work, they always make the same rate of pay. It's global to that particular employee. Here I'll click Add. And this, I'm going to use his hire date. I think we said October 27th. And then I'll give this employee $15 an hour. I'll click OK here. And that's a done deal. So remember, this is what I told you earlier. This is where you're making that decision about the labels. If the employee is hourly, if the employee is salary. At the bottom, we'll click OK here. And that brings us to the badges area. In the badges area, this is actually where you assign the employee to a specific badge. Click Add here. Remember, the badge number is actually right on the front of the badge. Now, in some cases, if we had told the software, remember yesterday, we were looking in the main company, if we had told the system to take the employee number and duplicate that as a badge number, then we wouldn't have anything to do here because the badge number would already be resting in this field. But that's not what we told the system to do. So we're going to go ahead and add the 5-digit number here. By default, it is always valid. Notice we didn't even have to check valid. It was already checked off as valid. Because I also told you yesterday, if an employee actually has a badge, if they're given a badge right out of the packaging. So let's say new employee just walked through the door. We don't have time to input them into TA100 Pro, but we just give them a badge, then certainly that badge is valid right out of the packaging. So here we'll click OK, and that badge is in place. Now, there are several things that can happen after the fact. So one is, what if Joe Sample loses this particular badge? Well, if Joe Sample loses this badge, we don't want anyone else to find this badge and then simply start to add or use the badge, clock in and clock out. So we want to make this badge an invalid badge, and then we're going to assign Joe Sample to another badge. So again here, I would click Edit, uncheck Valid, click OK, and now the badge is invalid. I then need to go back in and add a new badge for Joe Sample, and now he has the new badge. Now, what if 6 months from now, Joe Sample has decided to leave the company, and badge number 12345 is in very good condition, and he simply returns the badge? Badges can definitely be reused. So again, you can always reuse the badge at any time. When you reuse the badge, you simply want to delete it from this particular area. So if badge number 12345 is no longer going to be used by Joe Sample, but it is a good badge, I'm simply going to delete it at this time. Now, the goal is, though, I have certainly retrieved or pulled the clock, and I have all of the information for Joe Sample. I don't want us to delete this badge number before I retrieve all of the information for Joe Sample connected to badge number 12345. And even once I delete it from this window, I always tell clients, you don't want to reuse it until that badge has gone through a complete pay cycle of not being used. So again, what some clients will do, though, is they will take a badge, when an employee leaves, and they will simply put that badge to the back of their stack. So it may be 6 months before they actually get to that particular badge, or maybe a year or so before they actually get to reusing that badge. But that is indeed the process that they will use. Any questions about the badges area? And actually, I see a question here with regards to the global wage. And that is correct. Again, I also noticed that on the wages screen that it wasn't available, and because typically it's to the bottom of that area on the hourly side where we can go in and make those changes. So I was hoping when I went back in edit mode that it would be there at that time. Because again, that is exactly where that information should be. And I don't think we inactivated anything. I'm certain I did activate the labor level override rate from the main company yesterday, but I did notice that myself. So again, we will certainly go back and have a closer look at that. At the bottom, we'll go ahead and click Close here, and that brings up our clock assignment screen. In the clock assignment screen, if you're working with a client who has a hand reader or any type of a fingerprint reader, they will need to assign employees to the clock. Now, have you seen this area before? Definitely. We saw it yesterday as we were going through the clock configuration, because you can also do clock assignments from that particular section. In fact, that used to be the only section that you could do clock assignments from. But then we thought, well, that's not logical to make a client add a new employee and then have to go back into clock configuration to assign them to a clock. So again, this is one of the last tabs that we've actually added as a part of the adding of a new employee, or even just on the in the employee section itself. So again, Same screen that we saw yesterday as a part of clock communication or the clock configuration part of it. Here we do have to assign, because it's a new employee, they still have to be assigned to which clock they will be able to use, meaning which clocks will actually have their templates in place. Here I think we did create a hand reader clock, so I'll go ahead and assign him there. Notice at the bottom it says templates on file for badge numbers, and it currently says none on file. That would be correct. We have not assigned Joe Sample to a clock, or shall I say we have not enrolled him officially in a clock and retrieved that template. Once we enroll an employee in the system and we retrieve that template, this section will actually be populated with the employee's badge number. So eventually you should be able to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 once that employee has been enrolled at the clock. And the next question here, it says retrieve templates from. Retrieve templates from actually goes back to, what if this particular company had, let's say 5 clocks. Let's say they had 5 hand reader clocks. Well, when we communicate with the clock, or when Joe Sample clocks in and clocks out, is there one specific clock that he uses the majority of the time? Maybe he uses the clock that is closest to the warehouse. If that's the case, then that's the clock that if I have to communicate with the clock and retrieve a new template for Joe Sample, I'd want to retrieve it from that particular clock. Why? Well, that's the clock that he uses the majority of the time, so that is the clock that is going to have his best hand punch or hand template connected to it. In our case, I think we only created the one hand reader, so we're only going to have the one hand reader to select from. So in that case, you can just leave it as all assigned. The next tab over, again, they could have a fingerprint clock for 745, 780, 785. You would still need to assign employees to those clocks as well. I'll just click all clocks here, and there is one clock that we created. Same rules apply because we have not enrolled this employee in this particular clock yet. He does not come across with the badge number. At the bottom, we'll go ahead and click Close here. And we have successfully added a new employee, Joe Sample, into the software. Any questions about adding this new employee? Right, well, let's go back and have a look at what we did complete. So across the top, the majority of these tabs should look familiar. One, we'll start with the clocks. Well, again, that was the last tab that we worked with before we successfully added Joe Sample. This is where we made sure he was assigned to the hand reader clock, or if we have fingerprint clocks, he was assigned. Again, we no longer have the TA100, so you notice they didn't even appear in the window initially. Again, we don't sell those, but we don't remove this tab from here because there are certainly some clients that do still have TA100 clocks. The badges tab. So if there's any changes that still need to be made to the badges, because I think these things happen all the time. You know, if the employee loses the badge, again, this is the tab that I'm coming back to. If we need to reissue a badge or we need to make the badge invalid, again, it all happens back on this particular tab. The wages tab, there we are. So now in the wages area, we talked about this, and this goes back to Ryan's question. If this employee is not, let's say, a global wage employee, but this employee is actually, their rate of pay is based on the department. Remember yesterday I activated the labor level rate, meaning that if I assign a rate of pay to a specific department, anytime that employee worked in that department, well, that is the rate of pay that they would receive. I would simply uncheck the global wage here. Notice how the department and the job, basically the labor levels, become alive. Well, remember, we did not assign rates of pay to jobs. We made a decision that it was going to be department. And really, it should only be one labor level that is carrying a rate. Because if you use two labor levels with rates, you're basically confusing the system. and the system is always going to accept the lower level, which in that case would be the job if they both had rates. Here, if we click department, this is where I can say, well, if Joe Sample should ever work in customer service, I need to pay him this particular rate. If he should work in sales, I can put in a different rate for each one of these departments. Now, research and development, when it was created, it was not assigned or activated to house an hourly wage. So you'll notice how it's completely grayed out, because whenever they created it, it was not designed to carry that type of transaction. For training, remember yesterday when we created training, we did assign a rate of pay of $15 to training when we created it. Well, here, if Joe Sample should ever work in training, if I want to pay him $20, this is where I could make it so. Or if I wanted to say on this Friday, or maybe on Fridays, you could actually maneuver it so that on Friday, just on those 3 Fridays, I can make it so if he works, he's making $25, because it is a daily event. The system makes it easier. When you tab out of it, it picks that rate up and it goes forward. But you can always go back and manipulate specific days. So that's what I've just created here. But again, if I really wanted this to be 20 all the way through, let's update that. And we're good. I can pick any other. Let's say if he ever works in customer service, maybe in customer service he actually makes $17 an hour. Or if he's in sales, maybe he actually makes, 25 in sales. All of that is a possibility. Any department that I believe Joe Sample would ever be connected to, and he has a different rate of pay in, this is where I'm applying that particular rate of pay. And remember, this is all just for Joe Sample, because David Jones may make a completely different rate of pay when he works in sales or when he works in customer service. So it's very, very individualized. Any questions about those individual department rates? Also, just something else to share with you on the right side, the salary side. Besides saying if that employee is hourly or salary, you also get to do a few other things. The report hours from actual versus schedule. Let's say you're working with a client and they have decided to include salary employees in the software. Well, the question becomes, what is the expectation of those salary employees? Are they expecting those salary employees to clock in, clock out? What is the expectation there? If they are not expecting those employees to clock in, and they don't expect to see any time for those employees in the time card, then certainly you can just leave it at actual. But if they want those employees to clock in and clock out, and they do indeed want to see the actual punch information, then again you can leave it at actual, because that is going to show actual punch information. But also, what if they wanted those employees to clock in and clock out, but they did not want them to actually see, they wanted them to see the in punch and the out punch, but the total hours were actually based on the scheduled hours. Well, I could do actual, or excuse me, I could do scheduled here, and then I could say paired punching. In other words, if the employee is only scheduled for 8 hours that day, that employee could work 12 hours, meaning based on if you looked at the start and the stop time, but because the schedule said 8, that is all that they would have as the total for that day would be 8, because it's still basing it from the schedule. It's paired punching, so we are expecting them to clock in and clock out, but the hours are still being driven from the schedule. But what if I just want to know that they were here? In other words, just come in, clock in once a day. You don't have to clock out. You know, you can clock in anytime during the day, but I just need to know that you were here. You can do that, and they would still get the number of hours based on their schedule. So if that employee was supposed to schedule for 8 hours a day, again, by default, we're going to give them 8 hours because they clocked in. As long as they clock in, they get their total hours. You can also use never. Never means the employee, a salary employee, never clocks in, they never clock out. We're automatically going to pay them directly from their schedule. So whatever their schedule says, those are the number of hours that we're in, meaning the start and the stop time as well. Those are the pieces of information that are going to be displayed in the time card window for that particular employee. And the very last item here, the pay overtime. Typically, if you're going to use pay overtime, you're probably going to keep it at actual, because in most cases, people don't create a schedule that automatically pays overtime or accounts for overtime. So again, more than likely that would be actual, because it's looking at actual punches if they're going to pay their salary employees for overtime. Any questions about the wages tab? All right. Then at the bottom, we definitely want to go ahead and apply that. The next tab over is the Messages tab. In the Messages tab, this is definitely where you can see the messages that we assign to Joe Sample. And we just did his name, J Sample. But again, if we need to change the message, we always have access to coming back to this area to updating, changing the message. Remember, when you do change the message, you still need to communicate with the clock. And even if you change the message to say happy birthday, again, you need to change that message back to whatever it originally was, if it was the name or whatever it was before then, because the messages do not automatically just change back. And some people think, well, oh, it's not his birthday anymore. Why is the message still there? Well, did you change the message? The system does what you tell it. So if you told it to say happy birthday, it's going to say happy birthday until you change the message. The Benefits tab. Well, remember, we decided to use an alternate hire date. So that's why we can actually see time listed for this new employee per se. Because the system says, well, this employee has been working with us for 6,030 days. Why? Because it's looking at May 15th as the benefit date. Okay. So again, what you'll find here, this employee has some personal time, they have some sick time, they have some vacation, and any of this, because what you'll need to know, if you do have a client that is going to use our benefit accruals, the system is going to give them the balances that it assumes that they have, but it has no idea if they've taken or used any of that time. So that does mean that initial balance will need to be updated. And the way that you do that, let's say personal time. I can click the Details tab to the bottom. And notice, this is what I said on yesterday. And that's the beauty of the benefit accruals in TA100 Pro or in Genesis SQL or GenPro. You can always go back and see exactly how the benefits paid out. If you go back down, and you'll notice this employee was actually hired in '94. Notice the first time that he received the first set of 40 hours was in '95. I think that was the conversation that I had with you yesterday in benefits. I told you the benefit was set to pay on an annual basis because we did not give that employee any benefits up front. He will not see those 40 hours until the next year. So again, hired in '94, he gets the first set of 40 hours in '95. And it's personal time. It doesn't change. So every year, they just continue to get the 40 hours. So you can actually see how it's paid that out over that time. But the issue is now, this employee doesn't have 40 hours because literally we don't know if he's taken any time since May 15th. Again, that's when he received his last set of 40 hours. If he's taken any of the time, because now it's October, or actually it's November now, if he has taken any of that time, we don't have any idea because the company wasn't using this particular software. So you do need, or your client will need to go in to do those initial balances. Here at the bottom, we'll do a manual adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and date it for, in this case, we'll just date it for November 1st. The time, you can keep whatever the current time is because that is your current time, or I can midnight it out. Again, if you notice the time on most of the transactions that the system does for you, they're typically done at midnight. The type of adjustment, again, here it is a balance. I'm not giving hours. Also, that give hours could also be a removal of hours if you use the negative feature. Because, again, I could say subtract 10 hours and just do a negative 10. But in this case, we are just going to do a balance, which means the system will do the calculation necessary to get the employee to this particular balance. And I'm going to say they have 20 hours of personal time. 20, click OK. And then just like that, it updates the information. I'll close here. And notice now on your personal row, it actually has the 20 hours left because that is the balance that we dictated. The sick time works the exact same way. You can go into the details. Again, you can see exactly how it's paying out. All paying out. We'll click the manual adjustment here. And maybe they have, we'll say he has a balance of 30 hours. Close there, and it's all updated. Vacation works the exact same way. But remember, if you recall, vacation was something that we started to pay based on a monthly cycle. So at the end of every month, Joe Sample actually received that information. So remember, he was hired on May 15th. So come June 15th, you'll see his first set of 6.66666. And of course, he saves that amount, and you can see where it switches over to 10 and 97. And he'll stay at 10. Let's see, yep, he's already made it to the 13. And I think that was the last one in 99. Okay. Here, I'm not going to make any changes to that time. We'll leave that as it is. But if we wanted to, manual adjustment window is the same window for any benefit that you're using. Any questions about the benefits?
Hi, Tracy.
And we do have one question there.
Yeah. Actually, I missed before when you were going over the the microphone went out again. I think I wrote the question on the thing. Yeah, it was when you were going for the actual versus scheduled times. There were the two radio buttons you could choose between. Yeah, that was the report I was from. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The actual is just actual time, meaning actual punch time, meaning okay. I want my salary employees to clock in, clock out, and I want to see the actual total. So if they worked 8 to 5, they took an hour for lunch, that is indeed going to be 8 hours. Versus if I said schedule, I can still have that employee clock in, clock out. That's what we call paired punching. But if that employee happened to work 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and they take an hour for lunch, the system is still going to give them no more than 8 hours because the total that I'm paying for them is based on the schedule and not on the actual time. So they're still clocking in and clocking out. I can see the actual clock in and clock out, but I'm paying them based on the schedule.
So
or I can still.
Which one should it be set to by default?
By default, it just depends. There is really no default. That's why when I started that section,
okay.
I said it depends on what your client is doing, what the expectation is for the salary employees. Are they expecting their salary employees to clock in, clock out? Are they not expecting them to clock in, clock out? Do they want to see any information for them in the time card? So depending on how your client would answer that question, then you know what to do here.
Okay.
All right? And then if you don't want them, let's say you don't want to, the client says, well, we don't want them to clock in and clock out. We just want them to clock in once per day only. So you could do an in-only feature where all they have to do is clock in once per day, and then based on their schedule, we're going to give them 8 hours or whatever they were scheduled for on that particular day. Or maybe the company says, well, we never want them to clock in. They never clock in. They never clock out. But we do want to see information for them in the time card. Well, we can pull that directly from their schedule. So every day, whatever their schedule is, you're going to see that in their time card as actual work time, because that's what you told the system to do by saying scheduled never. Does that make sense?
Okay. That makes a little bit more sense.
And then I think there is another question. Is scheduled hours reporting option only available for salary? That is correct. They'd have to be labeled as salary here. So if, let's say, you really wanted to do this feature for someone who was hourly, again, according to the system, you would need to make them salary in order to pull hours from the scheduling window. Any other questions about the wages? All right. We were, I think, in benefits. Any questions about the benefits? Then we're headed over to the status tab. Remember, this was also one of the screens that popped up when we added Joe Sample into the software. In fact, this was probably the first screen. As soon as we clicked OK to the bottom of the detail screen, this was probably the first screen that popped up. And I told you then, you can always go in, or the first time around, you want to make an edit. But after that, you should be using the add feature. Why? Because it gives us access to control the date. So if 1 month later, 6 months later, or 6 years later, something changes for that employee, we want to know the date behind it, because that date is going to give us that history. So every time something changes, as long as we use the add feature, we assign a new date to it, we're able to see those historical changes. The next tab over is the Transactions tab. Right now, we do not have any transactions in the software, so you'll notice there is nothing listed here. Now, in just a little bit, we will be coming back to the Transactions tab, because I do want you to see the transactions that are in place. The next tab over is the Schedule tab. And believe it or not, we did see the scheduling window earlier. It didn't look quite like this, and that's because when we added the new employee, Joe Sample, into the system, I told you then there was only 1 week that was of any great importance to you, and that was the foundation week. So that was the 1 week that we needed to create so that it would continue to roll this information forward. Well, that's what we've done here. And notice we're now into the week of November 14th, and it's still picking up that same schedule for that employee. Now, if I wanted to make a change, this is certainly where I could make a change. Maybe on the 19th, Joe Sample really isn't going to work at the 7 o'clock shift. I can click, again, just click right on that time. It brings up the schedule detail window. I can select another shift. Maybe he's actually going to work the 8 o'clock shift. I'm not changing the department. I'm not changing the job. I don't necessarily need to update the rest of the week because the focus is just on the 19th. I can click OK here, and that takes care of it. But what about on Thursday? Maybe on Thursday he's not working any of those shifts that we have created. So he's actually not working any of these different shifts that we have listed here. No problem. I can go right into this section. Remember that shift override section we talked about? And I can actually add that right here. And notice once I put in that 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., it automatically states shift override, because that's what it is. I'm using a shift immediately right there that I am creating. So the system knows that by default. To the bottom of the screen, you also have some features that are called copy, rotate, multiple miscellaneous. Well, what if we actually take one of these particular weeks? I'm just going to go to a clean week here. I'll take this particular week. The week of the 7th, and let's say I want to save that as a template, meaning I want to take the 7 to 4, and I'm going to save it, again, assigned to the training department, assigned to the TA100 Pro job, because all of those are characteristics. So we'll check the box. I'm using employee number 6 as the template. I'm just going to label it a training template because that's what it is today. Click OK here. And that template has been created. Because in order to use the copy feature, there must be a template in place. So now that I have a template in place, I can select any one of these other employees. Let's take maybe Peter Baines. Yep, Peter Baines is a good one. What if this week, the week of the 14th, he currently works 3 to 11, but on this week, I actually want him to work 7 to 4. So the 14th through the 20th, I really want him to work 7 to 4. I can actually copy Joe Sample's schedule to Peter Baines. I can click copy here. Notice the template comes up because remember, you can't use the copy feature unless there is a template in place. The only template that we have is the training template that we created from Joe Sample. And out of that template, what pieces of it do I want to use? I want to use the shift, which is the 7 to 4. I want to use the work boxes, which is Monday through Friday. I want to use the department, which is training. And I want to use the job, which is TA100 Pro. And then copy from selected employees starting the week of, and this is where I dictate, because the from employee, again, is Joe Sample. That's who we're copying it from. And I am going to say use the week of November 7th to start this item on. And then I'm going to stop it for the week of November 7th through the 13th. And then copy to, meaning this is going to Peter Baines. When am I going to start it there? And I actually want to start that on the 14th. So what I'm saying is the schedule that Joe Sample had from the 7th through the 13th, I actually want to copy that to Peter Baines starting Sunday the 14th, just for that 1 week. At the bottom, I can click OK here. And in just a moment, you'll notice the schedule drops into place. So the 7 to 4 for the week of the 14th has now been populated. And that is what we call a schedule copy. Remember, you can only copy a template to an employee if the employee already has the schedule in place. This is not something that you can do for someone who does not have a schedule already in place. And remember, when you add a new employee into the system, by default, you're going to assign them to some type of a schedule. You don't have an option to do a copy when you're adding someone into the system. So you have to assign them to something. Any questions about the copy feature? Well, the rotate feature, in fact, we can actually say on Peter Baines, he's going to be a good example of a rotate. What if the week of the 14th he works 7 to 4, and then the next week he's back to 3 to 11? But the next week we want him back to 7 to 4. So we want a rotation where 1 week he's at 7 a.m., the next week he's at 3 p.m., 7 a.m., 3 p.m., 7 a.m., 3 p.m. That is indeed a rotation. In fact, that is a 14-day rotation because he has 7 days at 7 a.m. and 7 days at 3 p.m. I'll click Rotate here. I can activate a rotating schedule for this employee, and then I have to define the rotation. Here, the rotation is actually going to start on the 14th. I did tell you earlier it consists of 14 days. And then I'm going to apply the rotation to actually kick in starting on the 28th. Do I want to include the job costing information, such as the department, such as the job? Definitely. At the bottom, all I need to do is click OK here. And now, when I click this down arrow and I go to the week starting the 28th, that week should start with a 7 a.m. schedule. And there it is. Now the week of the 5th should automatically go to the 3 p.m. schedule. And there it is. If I keep going, it's going to keep rotating. 7, 3, 7, 3. And that is what we call a schedule rotate. Any questions about the rotation? The multiple miscellaneous, I will choose to hold off on the multiple miscellaneous only because I like to use multiple miscellaneous as a part of your time card feature. You'll see it's also listed here. because it really is indeed a transaction. And so I don't necessarily like to mix up transactions with the scheduling window. So again, multiple miscellaneous, we're going to save that for your time card window. The delete, I do not recommend deleting a schedule, because remember the purpose of a schedule. We talked about this yesterday. That shift actually makes three things possible. Your rounding rules, any auto lunch break decisions, or however we're handling lunch, it focuses on lunch and our break. And then, of course, we have shift differentials. So that's why the schedule is so important. So even if it's a flex schedule, those employees must have some type of schedule in place. Now, what about this update back and update forward? I'm going to go back to Joe Sample to demonstrate those particular items. What if the next week, let's say the week of the 21st, Joe Sample is actually changing his schedule? He's no longer going to work starting at 7. He's actually going to move to the 8 o'clock shift. Well, I can switch it to 8 o'clock. I can update the rest of the week. And then at the bottom, if I now want this to go forward, you know, the week of the 28th, the week of the 5th, I want that to keep going, I could do an update forward. Click apply here, and now guess what? Every week after that has my 8 to 5. Because that is the new schedule, and that's what we want the system to recognize at that particular point. Again, you pick a week and you just take it forward. Now, even if I wanted that information to go back, what if, well, maybe when we started out, we assigned Joe Sample to the wrong shift, and really, you know, since October 27th, he should have been working the 7, or should I say the 8 to 5. Again, I could have done an update back, and that's going to take that 8 a.m. and take it all the way back to the beginning whenever we assigned him to the shift. Or you can actually, if you check the box, you can also dictate the date. Now, no, the date is going to always go back. Let's say you chose November 16th. It's always going to go back to November 14th, because that is the Sunday of that particular week. Right? Any questions about anything in the scheduling window? Now, mind you, your client certainly may not be using all the possible things that we've talked about here, because I do know there is a lot in the scheduling window. But the goal is you want to make sure that when you first add that employee into the system, you want to make sure that you take care of this initial week, because this is what you saw when we added Joe Sample into the software, that initial foundation week. You just want to make sure that that week is indeed correct. Right. And then finally, the time card tab. In the time card tab, this is essentially where your client will do all of the work for their employees. This is where they can see all of the in-punch, the out-punch information. Everything about those particular employees is going to come into this time card window. Well, this is actually also a great time for us to take a break before we get started with the time card window. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break. It's about 9:27, so we'll make that 9:37. Same rules from yesterday. I'm simply going to put you guys on hold. I'll be back on the phone in exactly 10 minutes, and we'll resume with the time card or the employee time card. Again, don't hang me up. Just put me on hold and be back on the phone in 10 minutes. Thanks so much. Hello. Hopefully everyone is back with me. Bill, are you with me?
Yes, I am.
Bill? Hopefully Bill will come back with us. Dean, it appears you're still on mic.
I'm here.
Okay. Jasper, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
And Ryan, are you still with us?
Yep, I'm here.
All right. And then before we get started with the time card section, questions, comments, or concerns about anything that we have discussed just prior to this? Because once your client understands how to add employees into the software and make all of the edits to their setup information, then it becomes time for them to review the employee's time. So all of the in punches, the out punches, all of the time that has been created for that particular employee. And that's pretty much where we are now in the time card window. The top section is exactly where you will be able to view all of the in-punch, out-punch information for that particular employee. So as it comes in or as the clock is being pulled, all of that information will reside in this particular window. That's why you have the, what do you call it, grid format. Right now, the red information that you're reviewing is all about absent information. As it sits right now, this employee is actually hasn't worked any of the days this particular week. So they failed to clock in, failed to clock out. Therefore, they are indeed coming across as absent. We're going to focus right to the middle or towards the bottom of the screen, but it's what I call the visual row. Starting with auto process. Auto process is definitely something that you want to keep activated. The reason for that is if you keep auto process activated, you'll never have to manually update the screen or on rare occasions. What that means is if I add a punch to Joe Sample's time card, when I click OK, I expect to see that punch as a part of the time card window. Well, what allows that to happen is indeed the auto processing. So auto processing is what automatically updates that screen, and it recognizes that there is something new that should be added into that window. In the event, though, that auto processing has been turned off, notice it's no longer the blue color, I can always do a manual reprocess, which is on the bottom row, the very first button here, and this will also reprocess the screen for me. But again, it's me forcing it to do a reprocess. So that's why I say typically you always want to have auto processing activated. Just to the right of that, you have the show schedule. Show schedule being on the days that Joe Sample is coming across as absent. If I want to know what he was officially scheduled to work on those days, I can click Show Schedule, and that would just drop in the schedule information for me. Now remember, this isn't worked information. Notice there are no totals that you see in the regular column or the overtime column. It's just displaying what he was scheduled to work. So that's what it says, Show Schedule. When I click Reprocess, it is indeed going to give me those extra 2 days, again, based on the schedule, because the schedule that Joe Sample is assigned to, and we'll have a quick peek at it here, the schedule that Joe Sample is assigned to literally says that, yes, he is expected to work on Thursday and Friday. Again, notice the work boxes are in place. If I go back to the time card window, you'll notice it is the 8 hours, but take a look at the time. Remember, we changed the time on Friday not to be 7 to 4, but to be 8 to 5. And then on Thursday, we did a shift override, which was the 5 a.m. to the 2 p.m. So again, that's what you're seeing here. Just to go back and confirm, I'll bring that week as a part of the week in white. And remember the shift override we did, the 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., and then we just changed the schedule on the 19th. So the software picks all of that up when we do the forecasting out. The Approve button to the bottom, this is a visual approval. If I want to go ahead and approve the information in this time card, I'm able to do so. But again, I say visual approval because really, if I approve this, click OK, you can see the signature that it has been approved. But look at what we just approved. This is a time card that only has absence information and forecasted information. Is this really a time card that we would have approved? Probably not, because it doesn't have any real work information in it. Remember, forecasted information isn't real work information. That's just the system saying, well, if he does work what he's scheduled to work for the rest of the week, he could possibly have the 16 hours. But that's no guarantee. So again, I want to make sure that you understand the person who is making the decision to approve the time card, that is the person that has taken on the responsibility, that has agreed to the information in the time card. But the system itself doesn't stop that person from approving the time. Notice the software did not stop me and say, oh, no, you can't approve that time. because I'm making the decision to approve the time. As you continue to the right side where it says pay periods back, 0 will always represent the current pay period. If you click the up arrow, that will take us back to previous pay periods. Of course, we can use the down arrow to manipulate that as well. But again, 0, you always want to remember, 0 is your current pay period. And I say that because that's the same logic that we're going to use in the report section when we do arrive in the reports today. Just to the right of that, you do have the key. The key is nothing more than a color code pop-up. So when we talk about those reds for absence, the blues for forecasting, if you can't remember what those colors are, again, you can always come back down to the key because it's just a pop-up, and it'll tell you exactly what those colors are. Now, in training today, we are going to see the remaining of these colors, the purple, the green, the gray. The only color that you will not see will be the pink. Remember those default totals that we talked about yesterday that were part of the policy? I said, well, if this employee clocked in but failed to clock out, we could have granted a default amount. Well, again, that would have been the information coming across in pink. In our policy yesterday, we did not activate that particular feature. Now, just to the right of the word key, there's a double set of arrows going down. It also has a counterpart going up. Well, that's just another way that you can manipulate your pay period. Basically, they serve the same purpose as the single arrows do here. So you have the single arrows here, or you could use the double arrows here, whichever is most convenient for you. Any questions about this visual row? All right, then I'm going to just clean this up just a moment here. We'll go ahead and unapprove this. We'll remove the forecasting, and I will remove the show schedule. My concern with the show schedule for new clients, some new clients will automatically assume that this is work time, not realizing there are no hours listed here. So for my new clients, until they really understand show schedule, I typically recommend they leave it off. To the bottom of the screen, this is what I refer to as your action row, because all of these buttons literally will create a transaction or have a transaction reprocessed for you or something to that nature. So it really is an action row. You already know what a reprocess can do. It automatically, or shall I say it manually, reprocesses the screen to show you any new information. The add trans. I'm actually going to use the Monday, November 15th, to use our add trans. So I'll click add trans here. Notice what happens. Because I highlighted Monday, November 15th, and then I click the add trans button, the date and time in my transaction detail window are catering to Monday, November 15th. Anytime you want to add, it could be a vacation day, it could be an in punch or an out punch. Everything is going to go through this transaction detail window. There's no way around it. Everything is done via the transaction detail window. The transaction detail window starts with the date and time. Again, you'll notice the date because I highlighted the row, so this is my focus point, November 15th. The time, it's picking up the time right from the employee's schedule. If I want to change the time, of course, I could change the time. The date, I could do a right click. It brings up a calendar. So all of that is a possibility. For now, though, I am going to leave it at the 15th, and I'm going to leave it at 7 a.m. because my goal right now is to actually pay this employee for, 8 hours of jury duty. That's going to be our transaction for Monday, November 15th. In the function, if I click the drop-down, you'll find that there are quite a few functions where we could clock the person in, clock them out. We could also do the out for lunch, the in from lunch. If they needed to transfer departments, we could make all of that happen here. In this example, I am going to miscellaneous, though, because remember what my goal was. I wanted to show how to give an employee 8 hours of jury duty time. So remember, jury duty is a category, miscellaneous entry, all one and the same. When I select miscellaneous, it does give me a new window. So before we get to that new window, Let's look at the two remaining items in the top window. The next feature or next item is the clock. Anytime you do a manual transaction, you will always need to assign it to a clock. You cannot do or create a transaction without associating it with a clock. So the question is that I always tell my clients, since you're doing this manually, it's not like the employee is walking up to a clock and clocking in or out for themselves. You have to think about it. Well, which clock would this employee use? That's the only thing you're doing here. Which clock does this employee typically use? And that's the clock that I want to assign. Below that, the override round. Remember, we did create some rounding rules assigned to our shift yesterday. I think we decided to just go with the nearest quarter. So everything rounds to the nearest 15 minutes based on a 7/8 split. If at any time I wanted to override the rounding rules, meaning maybe this employee clocked in at 7:09. Well, we know 7:09 is actually going to round to 7:15. Well, maybe because this employee did something for the company, I decided that I was going to pay them for actual time, meaning at exactly 7:09. Then I could use the override round on that 7:09 transaction, and it would remove the rounding rules and pay them for the actual time of 7:09. The bottom part of the window is the miscellaneous. Notice the first section is our category list. Remember, these are the categories that we looked at yesterday. This is one of the second items that we looked at yesterday in training. Remember, we in fact created the bonus item. It's something that is paid in dollars. So whether it's paid in hours, whether it's paid in dollars, it is still done using the miscellaneous feature. We decided that just today we're going to do the jury duty. Again, it doesn't matter if this was jury duty, if it was bereavement, if it was military leave, any one of these items, including vacation, sick, personal, they all are paid from this same section. Here we'll go ahead and classify it as jury duty. It is an add. It's not a subtract because we're giving this to the employee. We're adding this into their time card. For hours and minutes, I'm just going to make this 8 hours, 0 minutes. But do know when you're putting in the amount, it is done in hours and minutes. So if I was paying this employee for 5.5 hours, it would be 0530, again, hours and minutes. Now, just to the right of that, you can actually see the decimal format. So essentially, if I was to say 8.5 hours, meaning 8 hours and 30 minutes, the decimal format would put that as 8.50. So do know it does take care of that for you. To the right of that, we have a question that says accrue towards overtime. If you recall yesterday, remember when we added in the bonus, and originally bonus was going to be something that paid in hours? And there was a follow-up question that said, well, is it paid? And can it be paid at overtime? And I told you not to confuse that question with could it accrue towards overtime? Because I told you when you get ready to pay out the item, that would be another question that you would have to answer. So again, here's the question. And the answer for this is actually going to lie with the company that you're working with. Again, I won't say every company is different, but different companies have a different philosophy. Some companies may say, yes, jury duty can accrue towards overtime. Some companies may say, no, jury duty does not accrue towards overtime. These days, I will tell you, everyone is leaning to the side of only work time accrues towards overtime. So in our case, we will not allow jury duty to accrue towards overtime. The differential. Remember, we know that TA100 Pro does accommodate for 3 differentials. So when I'm creating or giving this employee jury duty time, let's say this employee was typically a second shift employee. Maybe it was Peter Baines. If we were working with Peter Baines, because he typically sometimes works the second shift, would he receive jury duty? Would he receive differential for jury duty pay? Again, probably not. Like I said, a lot of companies these days are cutting back. If it's not work time, it is not paid out at a differential rate. But again, the company that you're working with certainly could be different. This is where you would make that decision. The level. The level actually goes back to the labor level. And remember, we have 2 labor levels. We have department and we have job. Here I have the opportunity of stating, if I don't want this particular jury duty to be attached to the Department of Training, because that's where Joe Sample is defaulted to, or the job of TA100 Pro, I could certainly switch it out here. In this case, I'm not going to change it. I'll leave it at the default. But remember, anytime you do play a miscellaneous entry, you can always switch the labor levels. At the bottom, I'll click OK here. And in just a moment, up top, you'll notice on Monday, November 15th, we have the 8 hours of jury duty. Category is jury, regular time is here. In the column that has the department as the header, notice this is a button. If you click this button, it's just a toggle, and it's just going to toggle between department and job. So you'll always see where the hours are connected, to what department and to what job. The next day is Tuesday. On Tuesday, November 16th, I'm actually going to use the next feature. It says Edit/Add Start. If I click this item, it still looks very familiar. It is still the transaction detail window. Remember, I told you, no matter what you're adding, be it a category, an in-punch, out-punch, they all work the same way. In this window, notice the date is still for the 16th because we highlighted the row before we click the Start button. Because it is Start, it is housing my 7 a.m. time. And the function is already set at clocked in. Essentially, there is only one new feature that we are not familiar with right now, and that is override automatic lunches and breaks. Remember, we do have an auto deduction for lunch assigned to this particular shift that Joe Sample is connected to. So in the event that Joe Sample has a day that he works right through lunch and we need to give him that lunch back, then we would use the override automatic lunches and breaks to do so. Again, that is how you can cancel the auto deduction for lunch or break. Right now, though, my goal is to only clock Joe Sample in. Now, I am going to clock him in for about, let's say, 07:08. So we'll click OK here. And that punch is already in place. Well, take a look now at Tuesday. Tuesday is coming across with the color of purple, and it's coded with the letter M. Remember the color code key that you have here. It is telling us that purple with the letter M is an indication of a missing punch. And that would be correct. Joe Sample clocked in on Monday, but there is no stop time on Tuesday. So he clocked in Tuesday at 7:08, but there is no stop time on Tuesday. So we're going to add the stop time. In order to do that, we're going to go back down to the bottom where it says Edit/Add Stop. We'll click that new item. And notice what happens. Again, the date is still for Tuesday, November 16th. But take a look at the time. Because we selected the stop button, it now associates the time with the stop time. Even the function, again, because we associated with the stop button, the focus now is on the clocked out. There is one new item here, the override punch link back time. Link back times are actually going back to our conversation yesterday in the policy section. Remember the policy where we could have put a 4-hour link back time or 6-hour link back time? You may remember me explaining to you that your link backs or your shift connections only are vital if the company that you're working with pays out daily overtime, because we want to make sure that those shifts link together. So if we have created a 4-hour or a 6-hour link back time, what if we indicated, well, no, we don't really want it to link on this occasion? I can override that punch link back time by clicking this particular feature. So again, I can cancel the link back that we had created. At the bottom, all I want to do is click OK. And just like magic, there is my Tuesday. I have a start time of 7:08. I have a stop time of 4 p.m. I have total hours of 7.75. Also, in the unpaid column, you can see the 1 hour for lunch. because that's exactly what that is. That's the 1 hour for lunch. On this particular row, what if I'm not sure, because I just don't understand how these hours were calculated to get the 7.75. Well, on the keyboard, again, regular keyboard, if you depress the R key, when you depress the R key, that will put your time card in what we call rounded format. And this way you can actually see that 708 literally rounded to 715. And then you'll know how you actually came up with the 7.75. Again, if I depress the R key again, it takes me back to actual time. But then if I press the R key, I'm back in rounded format. Well, what if this employee actually had a reason for why they were late that day, and we agreed upon that reason? Well, okay, we'll give you credit for 708. So again, we don't want it to round to 715. We just want to give the employee credit for 708. No problem. To the bottom, I can use the edit/add start, because remember, this is in the start column, and I want to make an edit to the time that is in the start column. So that is edit/add start. In this case, I'm going to use the override rounds. Remember, I don't want the rounding rules to take place. So override rounds here, click OK. And just like magic, it now ups the total. So notice the total went from 7.75 to 7.87. Also, if I was to depress the R key again, notice 708 stays at 708. It's no longer being rounded. And then what about the lunch? Again, this employee was late today. They really just wanted to make up all of their time, so they worked through lunch today as well. If that's the case, I need to find a way to give this employee that time back. So again, same rules apply. To the bottom, we will need to click edit/add start. And I need to do the second override here, the override automatic lunches and breaks. So click that, click OK. And you know when you activate something because it literally turns blue. Basically the same, the auto processing, you know it's activated because it's blue. Same rules apply here. We click OK. And notice that unpaid time is no longer in the unpaid column. It is now a part of our true hours. Notice that time also went into overtime. Why is that? Remember the policy that we worked with yesterday. We said Monday through Friday, if an employee worked more than 8 hours, anything over 8 automatically drops in OT1. So we did have that daily overtime rule in effect. Now, another way that you can actually clock an employee in, and we'll share that with you here on Wednesday. Now, today is actually Wednesday, November 17th. I can actually double-click right in the start column. So if I double-click here, it pops up a yellow box, and it only contains 2 items, the date and the time. That's it. So again, you can't change the function. You can't change the clock. You can't do any of that. You can't do any overrides from this window. It's really just a place if there was a missing punch. It's a great way to take care of a missing punch. In this case, I am going to allow it to stay at the 7 o'clock. I'll click OK here, and there's my 7 a.m. in punch. Now remember, because today is Wednesday, it does come across as green, an indication that the employee is in working right now. The next action item that we have to the bottom is multiple miscellaneous. Multiple miscellaneous is a very nice feature because the same transaction we did for Monday, the jury duty, well, suppose an employee needs a category entry for multiple days. Well, I can use multiple miscellaneous. Take, for example, if someone was going on vacation for several days. Well, you don't want to have to go in and do each of those days individually. You could do them all in one transaction. So here we'll use multiple miscellaneous. The time, I'm going to start with the employee's time. You can certainly keep it at the basic time of 10 o'clock, but again, I'm going to keep it at the 7. The category entry here, I think I said vacation, so we'll go ahead and keep it at vacation. It is going to be an addition. And then for hours and minutes, if I say 8 hours, that means any day that I select is going to be paid 8 hours worth of vacation. Again, I'm not going to allow it to accrue towards overtime. I'm not changing the differential, and I'm also not changing the department. To the right side, this is where I have the calendar. In the calendar window, literally all I have to do is say which days I want to pay this employee vacation. So in this example, we're actually going to say the 19th, the 26th, and I have some days in December as well that we know Joe Sample is taking vacation. So to the bottom, I need to click apply because I need to apply the 2 days in November before I move the calendar to December. So we're going to click apply here. Notice it populates with vacation, and that population of vacation only does so because we are using benefit accruals. I want to point that out because if your client isn't using benefits, it's not going to populate with the vacation information. Now I'll switch over to December, and maybe this employee is actually going to take 2 more vacation days, the 23rd and the 27th. At the bottom, if I'm all done, meaning I don't have another month to go to, I can certainly click OK. But if I knew there were some other days in January or what have you, I would want to apply December before I move the calendar to January. At the bottom, I'll click OK here. And just like magic, you can see those other vacation days appear. Now, the question is, though, well, there's one vacation day that's in black, but then the other 3 are all in gray. Remember, you can always come back to your color code key, and it will tell you that gray is an indication of a future transaction. Those items are outside of the current pay period. November 19th is a part of the current pay period. Therefore, it does indeed appear in black. Now, all of these other items that are in gray, when they become a part of their particular current pay period, for example, when this November 26th item becomes a part of the November 21st through November 27th pay cycle, it'll go ahead and turn black. The same with the Thursday, when it becomes a part of that pay cycle and this one becomes a part of this pay cycle. Again, they will automatically turn black because they have reached where they should belong or the cycle they should belong to. So that should tell you or tell your clients that if they need to go in and pay something or do something in advance for an employee, that's not a problem. They don't have to wait until that particular cycle is the current cycle. If they know the employee, maybe the employee has already put in the request, they can go ahead and make that so in the software. Any questions about the multiple miscellaneous? From Schedule. From Schedule is a very nice feature because it allows you to pay an employee directly from their schedule. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any more workable days in this particular pay cycle, so we're going to just go back to the previous pay cycle for one moment here, and we'll take Friday. Notice when I highlight Friday, a day that's coming across as absent, my From Schedule is now all available for me to use. From Schedule says, unlike Show Schedule, From Schedule says I'm going to pay this employee directly from their schedule. So the start and the stop time that I assign to them is from their schedule. So here, if I click From Schedule, you'll notice it populates right in the window. So it is something that you can do. And you can take any day. You can take Monday, do From Schedule. It's going to populate right in that window. Notice it's in black. It's not in red, so you know it's actually being paid for. So it has the start time, the stop time, total hours. Because the shift your sample is assigned to has the auto deduction for lunch, you see that in place as well. Right. The bottom right button here, the delete, you can, of course, use the delete feature in the software. So I'll go back to the current pay period. Let's say we made a mistake. This employee is actually not going to take vacation on Monday, December 27th. I can highlight that row, click delete, click OK, and that item disappears. Now, what about Tuesday, though? If I highlight Tuesday and I click delete, it's a little different. Notice it's now saying, well, which transaction do you really want to delete? Because there are two independent transactions here. We have the start and we have the stop. Well, here I'll need to make a decision, so I'm just going to say let's remove the stop time. And notice by removing the stop time, that does send that day back to being a missing punch. All right? So again, those are two possible ways that the delete button could appear. For the last tab that I want to chat about, remember I told you we would come back to this tab. It is the Transactions tab. In the Transactions screen, this is where you can actually see all of the different transactions that this employee has created. In punch, in, out, the jury duty, in. Well, see here, you know there's a problem. That's why I like looking at the transaction screen. Because literally, you know you should never see two clocked ins back to back. You know that there is a problem at some point there. And of course, we can see all of the vacation. What's interesting about this particular screen as well, there's a column called badges. Do you see the badge column? Notice there are no badge numbers associated with this item. Why not? All of these entries are manual entries. They were done by someone other than the employee. We know that because typically when there's not a badge number in place, there is a supervisor set of information in place. Therefore, we know exactly who added that entry. Right now, remember, I'm logged on as the system operator. We know the exact date, and we know the exact time that I added that entry into the software. Again, it's all right here. To the bottom of the transaction screen, the Add, Edit, Delete, these are the same Add, Edit, Delete buttons that we were working with back on the Time Card tab. So yes, if I wanted to add something, I certainly could. If I wanted to make an edit on something, I could. Or if I needed to delete something, I could as well. Now, I don't typically recommend you do any of these particular features from the transaction screen, only because you have to remember the transaction screen is raw punch information, meaning it's not information that has been processed. So some of the information that you're looking here is just really just hanging out here because it's raw data. I typically prefer you work from your time card tab. Remember, your time card tab is process punch information. So it's always going to link up the in punch to the out punch to show you the correct total hours. Prime example, remember yesterday in the policy we were talking about the reject of the duplicate punches? Well, let's say an employee did clock in twice within 2 minutes. Well, the good news is the time card is only going to show you one of those transactions because it has processed based on that particular policy or that rule. The Transactions tab, on the other hand, is actually going to share with you both of those transactions because they are, again, legal transactions, and the transaction screen is just raw punch information. Questions about any other tabs that we have looked at today as a part of the employee section? Because essentially, this is where your end users will spend the majority of their time. No way around it. All right. Then we'll go ahead and close here. I'll take us back to daily operations, and we're coming down to the approval editor. In the approval editor, this is a place where you can actually see all of what I consider to be your problem employees. Any employee that has a missing punch or an absent. I always like to check the box that says show count totals. So immediately before I even click on absences, I know how many I have. Or before I look at missing punches, if I was already at absences, I know how many I have. But the great thing about this window is you can actually make the edit or correction directly from this section. So I'm going to use the missing punch. The missing punch is for Joe's sample. It was on Tuesday, November 16th. I can double-click this row, or I can highlight and click Edit at the bottom. We'll just click Edit here. Notice it brings me right back into the time card window. Not the full employee section itself, but it does bring me back into the time card window, and I have access to the schedule and the transaction. Here, I'm just going to go ahead and add the stop time in. Perfect. At the bottom, click Close. Notice when it returns back to the approval editor, I no longer have any missing punches, because as soon as you correct that item, it disappears or it removes itself from this particular window. So that's why I think this is a great place for your end users to start their process or to start their daily routine. Have a look here. You're going to see all of your problem employees. Go in, make all of the necessary edits, and then if you clean this up, because the goal is you shouldn't have anything outstanding here. If you clean this up, when you begin to manually go through each of the time cards, you should not have very much work to do because you've done the bulk of your cleanup from the approval editor. Do know you can sort this or filter it by your group, as well as filter according to the different divisions. Any questions about the approval editor? All right, we'll go ahead and close there. Take us back to daily operation and then down to the status board. Remember, here is where you will see the actual status of all of your employees. Remember, it tells you who's working, who's not working. For those employees who are going to be out to lunch, you'll see a blue ball. For those out on break, you'll see the yellow circle. Also, one important thing to remember about this status board, the status board is only as current as the last time you polled or communicated with the clock. So in my case, it's about 10:15. So remember, we did the polling for every 2 hours. So literally, my clock would probably be polling right about now. So probably in another minute, this screen could potentially update because my clock is polling right now if we had activated the auto polling process. So again, for clients who say, well, it's every hour on the hour, well, this information would be no more than about 15 minutes old. So it just depends on when they last communicated with the clock. If it is a client that doesn't have an automated process, I would encourage them before they open the status board, they certainly just may want to go and do a manual poll so they'll know that when they look at the status board, they are indeed looking at very current information. Same rules apply to the bottom. You can filter according to groups as well as according to the divisions. Go ahead and close there. Back to daily operation, down to the task organizer. In the task organizer, the information that you see here is all of the things that an end user would typically do the most of the time in the system. Anything that they really ever need to do in TA100 Pro is housed in this section. This is always what I refer to as the customer service section. If you have an end user, they are a little lost in the software, they know they need to do something, but they just can't remember where to go to do it, all they really need to remember is the task organizer. If they can remember the task organizer, they can actually find everything. And then we set it up in such a way that if it is something that they need to do on an annual basis, remember we talked yesterday about your holidays. Holidays do not roll over. You do need to add the holidays into the software. Again, this is a great way for them to remember, add the holidays into the system. The daily items, such as if you have a new employee, polling the time clock or fixing all of the missing punches and absences. So it does tell them based on certain points when certain things should be done. Even the system setup, that's basically everything that we covered in day one. So if they have to go back to any of that information, including the holidays, it's all there. The payroll task just walks them through step by step of everything that they would need to do. Maybe this is a company that started employees to use the system, but they did not go in on a daily basis to do anything. So people have been clocking in and clocking out, and now they're getting ready to process the payroll. Well, what would they do? Well, this begins them from beginning to end. Of course, they need to pull the time clock so they can actually retrieve all of the punch information that the employees have been creating. Then they can review it, take care of all of the missing punches, the absences. They may want to run some reports to make sure that all of the information is indeed correct or share it with other managers. And then finally, they're going to create the payroll export. And the payroll export is something that we'll get to in just a moment in the report section. Take us back to daily operations and then down to global. In the global area, there are two global features, the message assignment and the transaction. You know, suppose I wanted to send all of my employees the message that we have a meeting at 2 p.m. Well, message assignment would be a great way to do that. This is global messaging, so I don't have to go to each employee and add that message. I can just go here, communicate with all of my clocks, because I'm going to make this a custom message. And we'll just say meeting at 2 p.m. Click OK here. Click OK here, and that is a done deal. And essentially, if I was to go back into the employee section, head over to the Messages tab, everyone now has that particular message. Meeting at 2 p.m. Now remember, if that employee walked up to the clock right now, would they see this message? No. You still have to communicate with the clock to download the message. So remember here under polling options, load messages, we still need to communicate with the clock to load that message. So it's a two-step process. That piece hasn't changed. Also under global, you have transactions. Well, think about everything that we were able to do for Joe Sample. We clocked him in, we clocked him out, we gave him vacation time, jury duty time, anything that I can do for one employee. Just imagine being able to do that for multiple employees. So in this example, we'll move everyone over. Remember, I could do it based on group or division. The punch, I'm going to make this item for November 20th. And I'm going to say that on November 20th, I want everyone to come in. I'm treating everybody to breakfast. If they come out to breakfast, I'll go ahead and give them 2 hours of time. So again, that's actually going to be a miscellaneous entry because I'm going to pay everybody 2 hours of work time on Saturday. So work time, it is an addition. It's worth 2 hours. It is a regular time. And notice, because work time is something that can be paid other than regular, it gives me the opportunity to make that decision. I will allow it to accrue towards overtime, but there is no differential, and I'm not changing the labor level. At the bottom, we'll click OK here. Click OK here. Close. And then if I went back into the employee section, every employee should have the 2 hours of work time on Saturday. And Carol. So they all have the 2 hours of work time. So that is the beauty of a transaction via global. And remember, I did the work time, but literally it could be any one of those particular transactions, clocking someone in, clocking them out, miscellaneous, anything that you needed to do. It can all be done as a global feature. The benefit accruals, if you recall, this is a section that we looked at on yesterday. This was a part of our configuration. Any questions about anything under daily operations? Because again, this is essentially where your end user will spend the majority of their time. Then we're headed over to the report section. In the report section, this is where you will find a list of all the different types of reports. Now, location is not a specific type of report. Location is literally where you can take a specific report and actually change the location of it. So take the absences report. If you didn't want it to be a part of daily and you wanted it to be a part of period, well, here's where you could make that happen. Again, location is literally where you're saying take a specific report and reassign it to a different location. So remember, absences was a part of daily reports. And if you wanted to move it to period reports, then that's the purpose of location. Let's go ahead and open the section of reports. Because the way it's divided, the left side is all of the types. So you saw those types just a moment ago under reports. And then the right side is actually all of the specific reports that are connected to that type. So period, here's a list of all the period reports. Weekly, here's a list of all the weekly reports. Daily, a list of all the daily reports. Remember absences that we just looked at and we're going to change. And export, remember yesterday, I selected only the prime pay export. So here's where you'll see just that one export. You don't see that full list of exports. Again, I don't want to confuse the client. And here is a list of all the listing reports. Now, listing reports are different than all of these other 4 types. Why? Listing reports only talk about what is available in the system, anything that you have configured in the system. Meaning if I wanted to see a holiday list, or I wanted to see an employee badge list, or I wanted to see a birthday list, or I wanted to see a department list, all of those things are what we're referring to here. Anything that has been configured in the system. If you wanted to see a policy list, all of that is listed here, or a shift code list, that's what we're referring to. Anything that was officially created or set up in the system. It's not about employee punch information. None of this is about employee punch information. So notice you don't have to decide which employees you're going to work with. On all of the other sections, notice how you have the ranges and the individuals. That's because those are the ways that you run those reports. If you're going to focus on employees by ranges or you're going to focus on individual employees. But notice not listing because it's not employee-based, which means the goal right now is to make sure that you understand how the ranges parameter screen works as well as how the individual parameter screen works. Because if you understand how those 2 parameter screens work, you can run every report that the software has to offer. Because again, all of the reports, as you can clearly see, are based on those 2 particular parameter screens. I'm going to start with ranges. We'll click Run here. The ranges parameter screen is divided into 3 sections. The top section is where you're defining the time frame that you want the report to cover. Here, there are 4 options: the pay period, special, yesterday, today. Pay period, meaning which time frame or which pay cycle. Remember I told you earlier, keep the logic of 0 always representing the current pay cycle. You can go back to up to 99 pay cycles. That's always an option. The second option you have here is special. If you click special, then over to the right side, you have control of the start and stop date. So if you wanted this report to cater to an entire month, here's where you would make it happen. If you wanted the report to cater to an entire year, here is where you would make it happen. If you noticed earlier when I walked you through the different types of reports, not once did I say we had a type of report that was called annual report. We don't have a section of annual report. That's because you can take any report and turn it into an annual report just by deciding the time frame here. Yesterday, again, you'll notice yesterday was November 16th, or if you say today, November 17th. The forecasting, here's where you will find the forecasting information, or let me not say find. If when you run this report, you want to include forecasted information, this is where you can check the box to do so. Now remember, what is forecasting information? Remember earlier in the time card we activated forecasting and it showed us the blue information? Again, it's including things that could take place by the end of the pay cycle. The reprocess, I do recommend anytime you run a report, you definitely want to keep the reprocess button activated. Why? Remember, it's always going through making sure that you have the latest and greatest information. In the middle section, this is the employee section. Remember I told you would always be able to include those inactive employees in reports? Well, here is where you're making it happen. You can run a report on all of your active employees. You can base it just on your inactive employees, or it could indeed be for all of your employees. So let's say you're running one of those end-of-the-year reports, then you probably want to make it for all of your employees, active and inactive employees. The bottom part of the window is all about ranges. So in the employees, if I want to focus on a range, I can pick a starting point and a stopping point. So let's say I want to focus on all of my employees with the last name of S. So anyone from Joe Sample to John Smith would be included in this report. And for a moment, just pretend that there are a few employees in between those two. Here's where I'm making that decision. The department, again, I can also pick a starting point, pick a stopping point with the department. Now remember, if you're using these two in conjunction, well, it's only going to give you those employees that are assigned to those particular departments. So those employees that have those particular departments in common, those are going to be the employees that would be included. The same for the division. If you focus your search on a particular vision or division, it's going back. Well, are those employees assigned to this division, or are those employees assigned to this department? Because at this point, you certainly could be narrowing your search down. And the same can be said for groups. You pick a starting point and you pick a stopping point. Keep in mind, if you only wanted to focus on one group, you could just put it in the starting or the beginning and the ending. So all of it is available to you. Any questions about the ranges parameter screen? All right, we'll go ahead and close here. And we'll just switch this over to individuals. At the bottom, I'll click Run again. And notice the individual parameter screen is also separated into 3 sections. The top 2 sections are very familiar. Here, the pay period, we're going to go ahead and make that the current pay period. The employees, we'll go ahead and keep it at active because all of our employees are indeed active. It's the bottom window that is definitely different. It is no longer a ranges window. It is an individual window. So if you wanted to run this report on Peter Baines and John Smith, here's where you could do so. All you have to do is double-click the employees from the left side. They automatically go to the right side. If you wanted to run the report on all of the employees, you could still do that just by clicking Add All. If you want to base it off of departments, you could do that as well. If you want to base it off of divisions, you could do that as well. All of that is an option. Or if you want to do it based on groups, you could do that as well. So all of those options are available. In this report, I'm just going to focus on Joe Sample. At the bottom, I'll click OK here. And this brings me into the second parameter screen. The second parameter screen is always the same. It doesn't matter if you're working with ranges or if you're working with individuals. Once you click OK, this is the same second parameter screen. It starts with the status. You may remember earlier today I did tell you those labels, what the purpose of those labels are. It's all about reports. You'll be able to use those labels in the report section. Well, here we are. As long as you've labeled your employees correctly, you can filter according to those labels. The sort, when you run this report, how would you prefer to see it sorted? Employee number, in other words, in numerical order based on the employee number, or alpha order based on the employee name. Now, in my case, it doesn't matter because I only have the one employee. The group by, you can group this according to department, or you can group this according to division. And group if the company is using those items. Now, in my case, does it matter? Not really, because I only have the one employee. In other words, if I grouped it according to departments, it would be grouped according to those departments that we had created, or grouped according to those divisions, meaning employees would fall underneath their particular division, or the actual security groups that we had created. the output to. In the output to, this is where I'm determining how this report is going to be presented. I am certainly going to keep it on the screen because I definitely need you to see the report, so we know that's going to be our answer. But keep in mind, I could send it to the printer, meaning that I know exactly how this report is going to look, so why not just send it to the printer? Typically for my new clients that are just starting to use the system, I don't recommend they send it to the printer. I always recommend they look at it from the screen. And if that is definitely what they wanted, then they can go ahead and print it from the screen. The file is just a soft copy, such as a PDF or even an Excel. The email, and notice there are two emails. The first email is actually going back to another user in the system. So I am a manager. I want to send this report to another manager who's also a user in the system. That's what the first email is for. The second email is all about another user. Remember, in the employee section, the detail tab earlier today, when we added Joe Sample into the system, there was a field where we could have assigned an email to Joe Sample. Again, this is referring to that particular email. Again, an employee-specific email. So if I wanted to send this employee a report, I could do so as long as they have an email in that section. But for now, we're just going to send this report to the screen. So at the bottom, I'll click OK here. And in just a moment, you can actually see the report. It is a time card report. You can see it listed here. A few things to point out. Again, your regular hours are being totaled here. Also, notice this row on Tuesday, there is an attendance code, the in late. The employee actually did come in a little late that day. On Wednesday, the employee is in working right now. Remember, that was our green row. On Friday, there is a vacation time, so all of that has been listed here. The signature lines, one for the employee, one for the supervisor, those are just a part of this particular report. On the top row, which I should have started there, but remember when we first started training yesterday and I told you the importance of the informational screen, the Generals tab, or the General tab, and it actually had the company name. And I told you whatever is in that field was what would be presented at the top of all of your reports. So the company name is what you're viewing here. Any questions about how we arrived at this particular report? Then in the print preview toolbar, I do recommend using this particular bar to close out. I don't recommend clicking the X. X is typically the first thing that people want to click, thinking that will close the report. It does not close the report. It only closes the print preview toolbar. What we want to use to close the report is actually the door, which is just to the left of the printer icon. And remember, I said if they wanted to print this report, they could still do so by clicking the print icon here. Here we are just going to close, and that just brings us back to the time card section. I'll close here, and notice, doesn't matter what report you go to, you still have to access it the same way. So this is an employee wage with category. It doesn't matter. It's still accessed the exact same way. The next report that I do want to go into is the export. Because remember, at the end of the pay cycle, actually probably the beginning of a new pay cycle, when the client is going in, making all of the edits and corrections, after they have done all of the work, make sure everything is perfect, they now need to create what we typically refer to as an export file. Here, the export company or payroll company that we're using in this example is Prime Pay. Notice still nothing changes, so I'm going to use individuals. Click Run. In this pay period, it's typically going to be for the previous pay period. So remember, when they're doing this part of it, they've already moved into the new pay period, which is the current zero pay period. That means what they're doing here is going to be referenced as a part of the previous pay period. Employees will say all because whether they were active or inactive, if they have made some of those employees inactive, we still need to make sure that we include them here. So it's just best to say active, or in fact, it's just best to say all, because whether they're active or inactive, we're going to get them if they have any information. Remember, someone who has been inactive for several months, well, there's nothing that's going to come across for them anyway. You'll see their names appear, but when we push them over, there won't be anything that actually exports for them. At the bottom, we'll click OK, because again, I am selecting all of my employees. Don't want to leave anyone out. And here is my second parameter screen. The second parameter screen is always linked to the actual payroll vendor. PrimePay is simply saying we don't need any of that other sorting information or filtering information. That's already been programmed as a part of the report itself. What you can do if you want to filter employees out based on those labels of full-time, part-time, permanent, temporary, hourly, or salary, here is how you would do so. At the bottom, we'll click OK here, and then it brings up the Save As window. Because remember, we're talking file now. I told you earlier, this is a file. This is a file that you'll be sending over to, or that your client will be sending over to the payroll vendor, or that they will be uploading for themselves if they have some type of online product. Now, for my clients, I typically recommend to them, you may want to create a folder wherever it is. It can be anywhere in their environment, but they may want to create a folder that actually says payroll export. So all of their exports are going to drop into one folder. So such as I have here, payroll export, and then in my DAT file, what I typically recommend is that you want to label it according to the date. So the date today is actually November 17th, 2010. In fact, a better way to actually label the date, and I notice I didn't do it on the one that's resting in there, is to actually start with the year. If you start with the year, it means that they're always going to be in true chronological format. Because eventually, if I've been using this system for several years, I'm going to see quite a few Novembers, but they're not going to be in chronological order. So here I'll click Save, or let me also say a better way to do the date. The best way to do the date is to actually use the last date in that particular pay cycle. So essentially, that date would be more like November, I think it was the 13th, that particular cycle ended. That was the last day in that particular cycle. So that's the best way to do that. So when you look at that particular export, you know the exact time frame that that cycle covers. You can click Save here, and notice it's a DAT file. PrimePay does indeed use a DAT file. All payroll vendors don't necessarily use a DAT file, but at least with this particular product, TA100 Pro, GenPro, GenSQL, they're always going to create the extension for you. So again, some of them may use a CSV file. Some of them may use just a text file. So again, the extension is always going to be in place for you by default. You'll click Save here, and that's it. So now all I have to do is either one, upload that to PrimePay if I have the online product, or I can send that to my payroll representative. But that is the file. Now the file isn't typically made to be viewed because remember, it is in file format. So you're not going to see employee names. It's just going to be codes. Remember, that was the purpose of those export codes. It's all going to be in code format. Any questions about the report section? Because again, once you understand ranges and individuals, your client is able to run any report that the software has to offer. And typically what I do recommend to my clients is once they have been using the system for at least maybe a week or 2 weeks, go in and run every report that looks of interest, because that's really the only way that they will ever become familiar with all of the different reports that the system has to offer. And think about it this way. You can't break reports. Either the information is there or the information is not there, but you cannot break reports. Or shall I say reports will not break the software because it's just reporting on information that it has. If it doesn't have it, it won't display it. Here we'll go ahead and close. And now we're headed over to File, because from file, we're coming down to the utilities. Now, utilities are items in the software that I always recommend are, it's the best way to upkeep the system, you may say. How can we keep our database as clean as possible? How can we review certain pieces of information at certain times? Well, that's a part of your utilities. Even, remember I mentioned to you maybe today or yesterday about the employee number. It looks to be carved in stone, but essentially you can change it, but that only happens as a utility. Well, here is where that utility can be found. So under File, your utilities, the first step, the repair, reindex, update. Believe it or not, the majority of these things, well, at least the update database, that is going to be done automatically for you. Now, the repair and the reindex, I typically recommend at the end of a pay cycle, you may want to have your client do a repair, do a reindex. In fact, do the repair first and then do the reindex. Repair is actually going in and just putting everything in the proper order. In other words, if something is out of line or the table is out of whack, again, repair will take care of that. On the other hand, reindex is saying, if there is something that should not be here, I am going to officially remove it. Remember, we always say, you know, you can delete something, but really it's not deleted in the software. So everything that we deleted in training today, every time I click that delete button, all of that information was actually going into one file. It's one delete file that's just holding everything that I said to delete, but it's really still in the software until I do this reindex. That reindex will just clean that complete file out. So that's why I do recommend do a repair, do a reindex at the end of each cycle. The update databases. Now, the good thing about update databases, the software automatically knows when it needs to update the database. The real purpose of why that is here is pretty much for our support team when we're doing things and we need to force an update to happen. But by default, if we went into the main company and we made changes there, maybe I switched the department codes from 4 to 5. Well, as soon as I clicked OK, the system says, hey, there's been a change here. Do you want me to compare and update the databases? And, of course, you would say yes, because if the system prompts you to do so, then you always want to do so. The other item, if you ever go to restore a file, we're going to talk about your backups and restores just a little bit, but if you ever need to restore a backup file, as soon as you restore that backup file and you double-click to log back into the system, it's going to say, hey, I see something new here. Do you want me to compare and update your databases? And, of course, you should say yes. And the third way, or the time that it knows that the system needs to be updated or the database is updated here, is if you update to a newer version of the software. The system sees that a change has been made. So again, it's going to request that same window, hey, do you want to compare and update the databases? So again, anytime the software offers you that opportunity to update, I do recommending accepting that opportunity because it sees something is a little different. The next section is one of those sections that is a critical section, therefore it is not available to every user in the system. This section is only available to the SysOp user, and right now I am logged on as SysOp. SysOp is the only one that can initialize the database. I mean, that's a big deal. When we initialize the database, that means that we're deleting everything out of the database and starting from scratch. We don't want just anyone to have that capability to do so. In fact, I'd only recommend initializing a database if you have spoken or if your client has spoken to you or they've spoken to someone in my support team and we've just come to the conclusion that the database is basically corrupted, it's holes, we need to start from new. Then, of course, we would do an initialize. The change employee number with, again, back in the employee section, it gives you the appearance that the employee number cannot be changed. And that is correct. It cannot be changed from the employee section. However, it can be changed as a part of the utilities. So if you do need to change an employee number, your client needs to change an employee number, it can be done. Also, updating the width of the employee number. maybe the company has decided to switch payroll vendors. So the company that they were with had a 4-digit number. The company that they're going with needs a 6-digit number. So they can certainly change the with back in main company. But in order to change it for all of the other existing employees, so let's say they changed it to 6 in the main company, but in order to update all of the other employees, they need to come here and update this, and that would automatically add those extra zeros when you open the employee screen again. The set reprocess date. Well, one, what is the purpose of a reprocess date? The reprocess date allows me to go back in time and reprocess the system. Remember earlier today we were looking at the time card or in the time card, and I could click reprocess, and it would just reprocess everything that was in the window. Well, maybe my client has been using the software since November 1st, and we realized, oh my goodness, we paid the holiday for Veterans Day, and it really should not have been paid to certain employees, so we need to go back and add another policy where these people don't receive the holiday. Well, okay, we go back, we add that policy, we associate those employees to that policy. Well, at that point, I now need to do a reprocess because I want the system to reprocess back to November 1st, where it knows who should get the holiday and who should not get the holiday, and process the time correctly. That is a reprocess date. So all I'm doing here is just setting the date and determining which employees I'm going to reprocess for. Now, the reprocess actually happens, and this is why I told you earlier, in that report section where you could see that reprocess box, I always recommend checking the box. Because essentially, if I'm going to use the purpose of reprocessing, so I'm going to set a reprocess date back in the utility, I need to force a reprocess to actually happen. Here is where I'm making it happen. I don't necessarily care about an output. I just need the system to reprocess. So I would uncheck all of this because I just need the system internally to reprocess. And that's how we can force a reprocess. So again, think of set reprocess date as the first step where you're just confirming the date you wanted to reprocess back to and the employees. But you still need to make the process of reprocess happen. The fixed unassigned badges. I mentioned this several times when we talk about the badge, and I say all badges right out the packaging is a valid badge. So that means someone who's not in the system, I could give them a badge and they can go and clock in and out. Well, when I retrieve that punch or those punches from that clock, if that person still isn't in the system, meaning I still haven't assigned badge number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to Joe Sample yet, but yet he's clocking in and out. Well, guess what? All of his punches are going to be in this particular window because they're basically in limbo. They're just hanging out, waiting to be assigned. I would have to go back into the employee section, assign the badge number to the employee. I can come back here and I can do a repost, and it's going to automatically realize, oh, I have some place to go. Let me send all of the punches to that particular employee. So this is a great place. It's great if, let's say there's one person at the company and only one person knows how to add employees into the system, and maybe that person is out for a few days. Well, that doesn't stop the process of being able to have new employees clock in and clock out. Just give them a badge, and they will still be able to clock in and clock out, and the system will capture all of their punch information. And once those people are added into the system and the badge number has been assigned, she would just simply come back here, or he, and then they would do a repost. Still back in utilities, we have the R files, the repost from R files and purge R files. You want to remember that R files are nothing more than raw punch data files. Every day that you communicate with the clock, an R file is being created. The purpose of that is if there is an issue and we need to go back and reassign those punches, you know, maybe you have a supervisor that just got mad at the company and went in and deleted all of their punches for their employees. No problem. You can go back and repost all of the R files. Now, again, that's just the punches from the clock. If there were any manual edits done or corrections, it would not, of course, pick those up. The purging of R files. Purging of R files is just that. Remember I said there's an R file created every day. So eventually you do want to purge some of that information. Now, how often? I really can't tell you how often I would recommend. It just depends on how long have they been using the system. Do they find the system to be running a tad slow? Of course, some things to consider when the client calls and say, oh, we find our system is a little slow. When is the last time they did a reindex? I would do a repair. I would do a reindex. And then if that doesn't speed it up, I would certainly come and then purge the R files. Because if the client has been using the system for 10 years, those R files that are, 7, 8 years old, guarantee they don't need those R files any longer. They're probably not going to be restoring those particular R files. The post-historical data. Post-historical data is actually the first step in archiving information in the software. First step. Think of it like this. There are two places that you can view information for an employee in TA100 Pro. You can view that information in the time card. Remember, that's where we were today. And you can view that information in the report section. That's also where we were today. When you post historical data, you're saying remove it from the time card section. So that's another way when people say, well, if the software is running a little slow, have you posted historical data? Because literally you are removing, you're deleting information out of the time card. Now you still have it, but you can only view it in the report section. So that's why we say that's the first step. Because then information that has been posted, you can then decide to archive that information. Now, once you make a decision to archive means you are now removing it from the report section. Therefore, it is no longer a part of TA100 Pro because it cannot be found in the time card section and it cannot be found in the report section. So you are completely removing that out of the system. You're archiving that. You're storing that some other place. Now, where you archive it to, a tape drive, a CD, a flash drive, again, all of that's completely up to your client. Just please make sure that you explain to them that when they archive it, it's not automatically being sent to Time America and put in some archive file. That's something that they are doing in their environment. We do not hold the archive. So many times clients will call and say, oh, do you have our archive? We want to restore our archive. Well, no, you didn't send me a copy of your archive, so we don't keep archives here. What I do have is the initial setup that I may have done for you, and I do tend to keep all of the setups that I've ever done for a client. So I do have all of the setups, the initial setups that have no punch information in them at all. That's what I have, but nothing based on archiving information. If they ever do need to restore an archive, as long as they have the tape drive, the flash drive, wherever they backed it up to, as long as they have that, they can certainly restore archive information. And restore and archive information can be based on a date as well as a specific employee. The last two items, the system backup, the system restore. The system backup, and I'm just going to do a backup for you here. Again, I do recommend same rules apply, labeling it according to the date that you're going to back it up. So I'm going to make that the 17th. The destination, you can, of course, change that based on the drive. You can choose any one of those drives. And then, of course, here I'll click OK. Because I'm just going to keep it in the backup folder connected to TA100 Pro, which is currently residing on my hard drive or my C drive here. I'll click OK. And you'll notice in the top right corner, it's just going through the tables, and it's all done. That's a backup. I recommend that clients should do a backup, if not daily, because I know a lot of people are not going to do it daily, but certainly at the end of each pay cycle. And if not at the end of each pay cycle, then at least once a month. Because remember, all of that information is already going to be in place. So we just want to make sure that we have everything if we ever need to use it. And I have a question here. Archive data is read-only. That is correct. Again, you cannot make any edits or corrections to it unless you, of course, restore it, and then you put it back in time card mode. Also, under utilities, we have the restore. So if I have a backup, and let's say something has happened to TA100 Pro, and now I literally need to restore that information. Maybe that computer crashed or a computer crashed, and now we need to restore it. So we've loaded TA100 Pro, and then where are we going to get our backup file? So I can click Select File here, and clearly you can see that I have quite a few backups. Like I said, I tend to keep every database that I've ever done for a customer. So notice that's where you have all of the alpha items listed. And these are typically from the trainings that we do where I tell you to label it according to the date. Because, again, that's what the client would do. Now, you as the reseller, when you're working on something for a client, certainly you may want to alpha label that. But you'd select it from your window and then click OK. Now, of course, I'm not really going to restore this because we just did the backup of it. But this is how that restore process works. Now, remember, as soon as the restore is complete, it will say that you need to log out, or it'll automatically log you out in a few seconds, and then you have to double-click just to get back into TA100 Pro. So those are indeed all of your utilities. Right. Now, we do have one final section today, but I promise you it will not take me any more than about 10, 15 minutes to cover that, which is our security, because I just looked at the time, and time just gets away from us. So under security, we have two pieces of security that we need to address. One is the levels. Levels meaning if you have one level that has full access, then we probably need another level, maybe a time card manager level, someone who can only access time cards. So in the level section, this is where we are creating those particular levels. Now notice there my add button was not available. There we are. So the system by default creates for you what is called the supervisory level. The supervisory level is the full access level. This level you'll also find that you cannot make any edits to. Notice I'm clicking edit and nothing is happening. You cannot change or edit the supervisor level. It is a level that comes with the system. What I can do is add a new level. So we'll click add. For the code on this, we'll just call it TCMGR. And the name, I'll say time card manager. It is going to be active, the set date and time. Well, this is going to be a time card manager, so I'm not going to give them access to the clock to communicate with the clock to actually be able to set the date and time. The print list, I will go ahead and give them access to the print list. The print list is the list that we looked at earlier today in the employee section, bottom right corner, right next to the close button. And I told you that was just a shortcut to your report. So definitely give people access to the print list. Now, if you notice how this is all laid out, it's laid out exactly as the software is laid out. Because literally what I'm saying is, under the File menu, what do I want this person to do? Under Daily Operations, what can they do? And so forth and so on. So starting with File, we have the Utility section that we just were working with. Now again, Utilities does contain a lot of information, but for the most part, I wouldn't recommend giving them access to very much, with the exception of maybe the fixed unassigned badges. But everything else, definitely for the main users of the software. The security, well, that's what we're doing now, creating levels, adding new users in the system, definitely not. Others, the print export, that, or print setup, that may be a good item, because if the printer that they normally print to may be out of tone, or if they want to print something from TA100 Pro, they may need access to changing that particular printer. So the print setup, certainly. Daily operations. Remember, that's where we spent the majority of our time today. And this is indeed where a manager, a time card manager, would certainly spend a lot of their time. So here, for the most part, we're going to give them a lot of access. The approval editor, that's the place where you can see all of your problem employees, definitely. Viewing employees, yes, but being able to add new employees or edit any of their information that was on that detailed tab or delete employees, definitely not. Now, what about, do I even want to give them access to the detailed tab? Remember the tab where you could see their employee number, their birth date, their social? I don't even have to give them access to that tab. Notice this is in, if I want to give them access, I can check the box. That's not add, edit, or delete access, just access to view the details tab. Or I don't have to give them that access. For training, we won't give them that access. The time card, well, that's a given. They need complete access to that. They also need access to be able to approve the time card. We'll give them full access to the schedules. We'll also give them the schedule override. Remember how I was able to put in the 5 o'clock to 2 p.m. time? The transactions, we'll give them full access there. The status, that's just going to be view. I don't need this person going in, changing the label of someone or making someone inactive. They don't need to do all of that. The benefits, definitely view. I want them to be able to view the benefit balances, but definitely not make any edits, like give someone 20 hours extra of time or take away 20 hours and give them a new balance, none of that. The messages, they can view. Now, the only reason I'm not giving this person add or edit access to the messages is because they do not have access to communicate with the clock. Because remember, if someone communicates or is changing a message, they would need access to communicate with the clock. Unless we have the clocks as a part of the automated polling process, if every time it polls it's loading a message, then certainly we could give them access to changing the messages here. Wages, we're not going to give them access to wages, but I will give them access to badges, just to view the badge, not to change badges, as well as to the clocks and to the status board. The task organizer, well, that's a lot of information there, so I'm not going to give the time card manager access to that, and definitely not benefit accruals. I don't need them reconfiguring how our benefits are set to pay out. The global, globals, maybe transactions, definitely not the messages because we didn't even give them message capability here. The next section over is reports. So remember all the different types of reports. In this window, I would probably give the time card manager access to every type of report with the exception of the payroll export. Remember, reports are just information. Either it's there or it's not there. But the export, I don't need them creating export files. Now, again, they could create the export file. They're not going to know what to do with it, but they could certainly have access to creating that as well. The system setup, which is indeed the brains of our entire software. Well, we're not going to give them access to create new categories and policies. No, that's truly the brains of our entire system. And, of course, communication. We are not going to give them access to communication. Think about it. Even if we gave them access to communication, if they did not have a hardware key or if they did not have a polling key, they still would not be able to communicate with the clock because every user who is communicating with the clock manually will need some type of a key, whether it's the official hardware key that comes with the software or whether they purchased a polling key. At the bottom, we can click OK, and that is my time card manager level created. Remember, you can create as many levels as you need to with different types of access. Because you may have a level below this or a level above this, maybe a level between supervisor and time card. All of that is a possibility. I'll take us back to File, to Security, and now we're headed over to User Maintenance. In the User Maintenance window, here is where I'm adding a new user into the system. So I'm going to add a time card manager into the software. I'll click Add here, and I'll make it myself, T. Akins. I'll give myself a password. And remember I told you earlier about the supervisor badge. The supervisor badge field before wasn't always mandatory. Well, let me rephrase. It was always mandatory, but it really did not serve a purpose. Well, now with the 700 series clock, when we looked at clocks just then, I said if you're going to take a badge, you can take any badge and make it a supervisor badge. It doesn't have to be a badge that starts with 11 or a badge that starts with 10. So here I'm just going to make this badge 9898. Active, definitely. I'm not going to do a login pass-through because I want to be able to key in my login ID and my password. Key in my last name here, first name. The security level is where we're going to find the change because I don't need full access. I only want the time card manager access, and that's the level of access that we just created. For the startup, I'm going to go ahead and make this take me right into the employee section. So when I log into the system, it's going to bring me right into the employee section. The color quality, I'm going to make that high. The gradient background, I'm going to keep that as yes. The TA100 Pro Messenger, think of that as instant messenger embedded in TA100 Pro. So let's say you need other users to exit out of the system. Then you can send them a message via IM directly in TA100 Pro. The email profile, we'll go ahead and add that. And that's my email. And notice the two tabs across the top, the most important to a certain extent. Here is where I'm going to now say which employees will this time card manager, Tracy Akins, myself, have access to. Because she doesn't need access to all employees. We don't want to give her access to all employees. So I can decide that based on a division as well as group. So for divisions, I like to use lists. You can use ranges, but I prefer to use lists because I can just pick and choose individual items. I'm going to give her access or give me access to the Arizona division. And then for groups, again, I'm going back to lists, and I'm going to give me access to the training list. So any employees that are in Arizona division and are part of training, this person will have access to. If they have not been assigned to the Arizona division and they are in training, I will not be able to see them. They need to have both of those criteria. They need to be in Arizona and in training. At the bottom, I'll click OK here, and we'll close there, and we're going to test my user ID. So we'll go back to File, down to Login New User. Here I'm logging in as T. Akins, putting in my password, clicking OK to access the software, and it brings me right into the employee section because remember, that's where I told the system I wanted to go. To the left side, I only have one employee. There was only one employee that fit the criteria, being in the Division of Arizona and the group of training. Notice the tabs across the top. It appears that I may have access to the Detail tab, but when I click it, there's nothing there. Remember, you didn't give me access to that. The Clocks tab, I can view which clock the employee is assigned to, but I can't make any changes. The Badges, I can view the badge information, but no changes. Wages, we didn't even give you access to the wage information. Messages, I can view, but no changes. Benefits, I can view, but indeed, even if you click it, you can't make any changes here. Status, view, no change. For the next three tabs, the transactions, I have full, complete access to do what I need to do. The schedules, I can do everything I need to do. As well as the time card, I have full access to doing everything that I need to do. So those three tabs are where I'm going to spend the majority of my time. Notice if you click the drop down for division, I only see the division that I have, or if you click the group, I only see the group that I have access to. If you close here, you go back to File, Security, I can change my password. Again, if I don't like the password that I issued to myself, this is where I can change it. Every user is able to change their own password. The utilities, the only utility that we gave me access to was the fixed unassigned badge. The print, I did give me access to the print setup. Remember I said if I needed to change the printer. So all of that is appropriate there. The environment. Now the environment is a very nice place because this is all custom to the user who's actually logged into the software. So if I want to hear the bells, you know, when you get to the end of a field, it'll ding for you. I can check that, and it'll do that for me. So again, if you go back in, notice it's checked now. Again, I'm not a fan of bells, so I'm not going to leave that checked. The background. Notice this blue background with the people walking across the tile floor. If I want to change that, in this window, about 4 items below the line, there's an abbreviated background. I can click that, and it gives me a list of all the different backgrounds to choose from. Maybe I am a big fan of, let's say, cows. Well, I can actually switch that to a cow background. And in just a moment, it may take a moment for your the GoToMeeting to load that up on the TA100 Pro screen. But you should see by now, my screen is completely full of a cow pattern. A tad bit overwhelming, but again, I can keep it this way. It's custom. That's what I like. That's what I can have. Someone else may decide to do something else with their background. Take us back into the background. In the bottom right corner, I can click the default, and that'll just bring us back to the basic blue. Also in the environment, we have the navigation selection. So notice the toolbar in the top left corner. It's very, very small. I can increase that. I can make it a large toolbar. I can even take it, and my favorite is, of course, the center screen shortcut. I can take it and put it right to the center of the screen. So if I want to get to the employee section, I'm right there. The status board, the reports, the approval editor, I am right there. Now notice the other items that are grayed out, I simply don't have access to those items. So polling, the task organizer, the auto process, those are things that you did not give me access to. Now there are some other navigation selections like the sidebar. So in just a moment, that's going to come to the left side. So you'll see it here. And then one of the latest features that we have taking from Mac environment, the zoom bar just to the bottom, where you can just kind of zoom right over and it goes to where you need to go. But again, let's say I really prefer the center screen shortcut, so I can keep it at the center screen shortcut. Also under daily operations, the approval editor, remember I have full access there, seeing all of my problem employees. The status board, I do have access to viewing the status board. But remember, I'm only going to see the employees that I have access to. Won't see all of the employees. The global, you did give me the transactions global. That was it. The benefit accruals, the update to current, well, that doesn't hurt. If there is something that needs to be updated, they can. I have full access to all of the reports with the exception of the payroll export. The system setup, I have no access here. Remember, that's the brains of the software. Definitely no access here. Communication, no access at all. But of course, I do have full access to help. So if I do have an issue, I can always use the help. In fact, anywhere in the software that an employee may be, they can always use F1, and F1 is automatically going to bring up help to whatever section they are in at that time. Any questions about anything that we have covered today as well as yesterday in TA100 Pro? All right, been hearing no questions. Again, my apologies about going over the 15 minutes there, but I know I can just start talking and just can't help myself sometimes. I do appreciate your time and attendance today and yesterday for TA100 Pro. I do believe all of you should have my contact information. So remember, if you do have some questions or concerns, certainly feel free to email me or call me. Either way works. And I'll certainly get back to you. Of course, do give me at least 24 hours because what I do every day is train at least 3 to 4 hours at a time. So I'm not the easiest person to catch up with, but just give me 24 hours and I'll certainly communicate back with you. Questions, comments, or concerns about anything that we have discussed in your TA100 Pro Reseller training? Well, again, it has certainly been a pleasure working with all of you or listening to all of you. Again, don't hesitate to call us if you need us. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a good week.